The ancient trick to never get hurt again. Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to share with you something that could fundamentally change your relationship with emotional pain forever. What I'm about to tell you is an ancient technique, a psychological trick, if you will, that the Stoic philosophers discovered over 2,000 years ago. And it's so powerful that once you truly understand it and apply it, you will never be emotionally hurt in the same way again. Now, I know that sounds like a bold claim. You might be thinking, come on, that's impossible, everyone gets hurt. Pain is just part of life. And you're right about one thing, pain is indeed part of life. But here's what most people don't understand. There's a crucial difference between pain and suffering. Pain is inevitable, but suffering, the prolonged emotional agony that can last for weeks, months, or even years after an event, that's optional. And that's what we're going to explore today. Think about the last time you were really hurt emotionally. Maybe it was a breakup. Maybe someone betrayed your trust. Maybe you were rejected for a job you really wanted. Or perhaps someone you loved disappointed you deeply. Now think about how long that hurt lasted. Days? Weeks? Months? For some people, emotional wounds from decades ago still cause them pain today. But what if I told you that this prolonged suffering is not actually caused by the event itself, but by something much more subtle, something happening in your own mind that you have complete control over? The ancient Stoics understood something about human psychology that modern science is only now beginning to catch up with. They understood that our emotional suffering is not actually caused by what happens to us, but by our thoughts about what happens to us. More specifically, it's caused by the gap between our expectations and reality, between what we think should happen and what actually does happen. But before we dive deep into this ancient wisdom, let me tell you a story that perfectly illustrates what I'm talking about. Imagine you're walking down the street and you see your best friend across the road. You wave enthusiastically, you call out their name, you're genuinely excited to see them, but they don't wave back. They don't even seem to notice you. They just keep walking. How would you feel? Hurt? Rejected? Confused? Maybe even angry? Now, most people would carry that hurt with them for the rest of the day, maybe longer. They'd start creating stories in their mind. Maybe they're mad at me. Maybe I did something wrong. Maybe they don't actually like me as much as I thought. And this storytelling, this mental narrative, would cause them real emotional pain. But here's what the Stoics understood, that pain is not caused by your friend not waving. It's caused by your expectation that they should wave, combined with your interpretation of what their not waving means. What if your friend was simply distracted? What if they were dealing with a personal crisis and didn't even see you? What if they were wearing contact lenses and literally couldn't see clearly enough to recognize you from that distance? What if they were lost in thought about something important? What if they were on their way to handle an emergency? The event itself, your friend not waving, is neutral. It only becomes painful when we add our expectations and interpretations to it. And this is the key to emotional invulnerability. Once you truly understand this mechanism, once you see how your own mind creates your suffering, you gain the power to stop it. Now, I want to be very clear about something before we go further. When I talk about never getting hurt again, I'm not talking about becoming emotionally numb or disconnected from life. I'm not advocating for a cold, robotic existence where you don't care about anything or anyone. What I'm talking about is a kind of emotional resilience that allows you to engage fully with life while remaining unshakable at your core. The Stoics had a beautiful way of describing this. They talked about being like a great oak tree in a storm. The oak tree bends with the wind. Its leaves rustle, its branches sway, but its roots remain firm and deep. It doesn't break because it doesn't resist the storm. It flows with it while maintaining its essential stability. This is what true emotional strength looks like. Think about this metaphor for a moment. The oak tree doesn't become rigid in the face of the storm. That would cause it to snap. It doesn't become limp either. That would cause it to be uprooted. Instead, it finds the perfect balance between flexibility and strength, between responsiveness and stability. This is exactly what we're aiming for in our emotional lives. So what is this ancient trick? It's actually a combination of several techniques that work together to create what the Stoics called apatheia. Not apathy in the modern sense, but a state of emotional equilibrium where external events cannot disturb your inner peace. The word apatheia comes from the Greek pathos, meaning without passion or without suffering. But this doesn't mean without feeling, it means without being overwhelmed by feelings, without being enslaved by emotions. The first part of this trick is understanding what the Stoics called the dichotomy of control. This is the foundational insight that changed everything for me personally, and I believe it will change everything for you too. The dichotomy of control is simply this. There are things that are up to us, and there are things that are not up to us. And the path to emotional freedom lies in focusing exclusively on what is up to us while accepting completely what is not up to us. But here's where most people get confused. They think they understand this concept, but they don't really grasp how radical it is. Let me give you some examples of what's actually up to us versus what's not up to us, and prepare to be surprised. What's up to us? Our thoughts, our judgments, our values, our choices, our responses to events, our effort, our attitude, our character development, our decision to love or not to love, our decision to trust or not to trust, our decision to hope or despair, our interpretation of events, our focus, our priorities, our habits, our daily practices, our learning, our growth, our compassion, our forgiveness, our gratitude, our presence, our attention. What's not up to us? Other people's thoughts, other people's feelings, other people's choices, other people's responses to us, the past, the future, the weather, natural disasters, economic conditions, aging, illness, death, whether other people like us, whether we get the job, whether our partner stays with us, whether our children make good choices, whether we become famous, whether we become wealthy, whether we're born into privilege or poverty, whether we're naturally gifted or have to work harder, whether accidents happen to us, whether we develop genetic diseases, whether other people approve of our choices. Now, at first glance, this might seem depressing. You might think, wait, so I don't have control over whether my partner stays with me? I don't have control over whether I get the job I want? I don't have control over whether my children turn out well? And in one sense, that's correct. You don't have direct control over these outcomes. But here's the beautiful paradox. When you stop trying to control what you can't control and focus entirely on what you can control, you actually become much more effective at influencing the outcomes you care about. Think about it this way. If you're constantly worried about whether your partner will leave you, if you're constantly trying to control their feelings and choices, what kind of person do you become? You become needy, insecure, manipulative, anxious, possessive, and ironically, these qualities make it more likely that your partner will actually want to leave. But if you focus on what you can control, being the best version of yourself, treating your partner with love and respect, working on your own character and growth, being genuinely supportive and caring, you become the kind of person that others naturally want to be around. The same principle applies to everything else. If you're obsessed with getting a particular job, you might come across as desperate in the interview. But if you focus on what you can control, preparing thoroughly, presenting yourself authentically, doing your best, developing your skills, you're much more likely to succeed, either at getting that job or at finding an even better opportunity. Let me share a personal example of how this worked in my own life. For years, I was obsessed with trying to control how people perceived me. I would carefully craft my words and actions to try to create the impression I wanted. I would worry constantly about whether people liked me, whether they thought I was smart, whether they approved of my choices. This constant effort to control others' perceptions was exhausting and ultimately counterproductive because it made me seem inauthentic and insecure. When I finally understood the dichotomy of control, I realized that other people's opinions of me were completely outside my control. Their opinions depended on their own psychology, their own experiences, their own biases and preferences. I could be the most wonderful person in the world, and some people still wouldn't like me. I could be flawed and imperfect, and some people would still appreciate me. Their opinions were about them, not about me. This realization was incredibly liberating. Instead of trying to control others' perceptions, I focused on what I could control, being authentic, living according to my values, treating people well, working on my own growth and development. Paradoxically, when I stopped trying to make people like me, I became much more likable. When I stopped trying to appear perfect, I became more relatable and trustworthy. When I focused on being genuine rather than impressive, I actually became more impressive. This is the first part of the ancient trick. Radical acceptance of what's not up to you, combined with total responsibility for what is up to you. But there's much more to explore. The second part of the trick involves something the Stoics called premeditatio malorum, or the premeditation of evils. Now, this might sound morbid or negative, but it's actually one of the most liberating practices you can adopt. The idea is to regularly imagine losing the things you value most, your health, your relationships, your possessions, even your life, not to become depressed or anxious, but to appreciate what you have while you have it, and to prepare yourself psychologically for the inevitable changes and losses that are part of life. Here's how this works in practice. Let's say you're in a relationship that you cherish. Instead of living in constant fear that it might end, or trying desperately to control your partner to ensure it doesn't end, you would regularly remind yourself that this relationship, like all relationships, is temporary. Your partner could decide to leave, they could die in an accident, they could change in ways that make the relationship no longer viable. By contemplating these possibilities not with dread but with acceptance, you accomplish several things. First, you appreciate your partner more deeply while you have them. Every moment becomes precious because you're aware of its temporary nature. Have you ever noticed how much more beautiful a sunset seems when you remember that you won't see infinite sunsets in your lifetime? How much more meaningful a conversation becomes when you realize that you have a limited number of conversations with this person. This is the gift of remembering impermanence. Second, you stop taking the relationship for granted. You invest more fully in being present and loving. You're less likely to waste time on petty arguments or to postpone expressions of love and appreciation. You're more likely to forgive quickly and love deeply. Third, and most importantly, you prepare yourself psychologically for the inevitable end, whatever form it might take. This doesn't make you love less, it makes you love more freely, without the desperate attachment that causes so much suffering. Let me share a personal example of how this worked in my own life. I used to be terrified of public speaking. The thought of giving a presentation or speaking in front of a group would fill me with anxiety for days beforehand. I would imagine all the ways it could go wrong, forgetting my words, being judged, being rejected, humiliating myself. These mental rehearsals of disaster were making me miserable. Then I learned about the Stoic practice of negative visualization, and I applied it differently. Instead of accidentally imagining the worst-case scenarios with fear, I deliberately imagined them with acceptance. I would picture myself forgetting my words and think, if this happens, I'll acknowledge it, maybe make a joke about it, and continue. People will understand. Everyone has experienced this. I imagined being judged or criticized and thought, if this happens, I'll consider whether the criticism is valid and useful, and if not, I'll let it go. Their judgment says more about them than about me. I would imagine the audience being bored or unresponsive and think, if this happens, it doesn't mean I'm a failure. Maybe the topic isn't relevant to them. Maybe they're tired. Maybe they have other things on their minds. I can still deliver my message authentically and let them decide what to do with it. By practicing this kind of negative visualization, I was preparing myself for these possibilities without being devastated by them. And something remarkable happened. Not only did my anxiety about public speaking disappear, but I actually became a much better speaker because I was no longer paralyzed by the fear of imperfection. This brings us to the third part of the ancient trick, understanding the difference between our judgments and reality. The Stoics taught that it's not events themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about events. This might seem like a subtle distinction, but it's absolutely crucial for emotional freedom. When something happens to us, there are actually two separate things occurring. First, there's the objective event itself. Second, there's our interpretation or judgment of that event. Most people conflate these two things, but they're actually completely separate. And here's the key insight. We have no control over the first, but we have complete control over the second. Let's use a concrete example. Imagine you get fired from your job. The objective event is your employment has been terminated. That's a fact. Your boss called you into their office, told you that your position was being eliminated or that your performance wasn't meeting expectations, and asked you to clear out your desk. These are facts, observable, measurable events that occurred in the physical world. But then your mind immediately starts adding interpretations. This is terrible. I'm a failure. I'll never find another job. People will think less of me. I'm financially ruined. My career is over. I'm worthless. This always happens to me. Life is unfair. These interpretations feel like facts, but they're actually judgments, and judgments can be changed. A Stoic would approach this same situation differently. They would acknowledge the objective fact, my employment has been terminated, but then consciously choose their interpretation. They might think, this is an opportunity to find something better. This is a chance to reassess what I really want in my career. This temporary setback will teach me resilience. I have skills and experience that are valuable, and I will find another position. Maybe this job wasn't the right fit for me anyway. Perhaps this will push me to start that business I've been thinking about. This could be exactly what I needed to make a positive change in my life. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should just think positive thoughts and everything will be fine. That's not what this is about. What I'm suggesting is that you recognize that your initial emotional reaction to events is based on automatic, unconscious judgments that you can learn to examine and, if necessary, change. The key is to catch yourself in the moment when you're adding interpretation to events. Most people do this so automatically that they don't even realize they're doing it. The event and their judgment of the event become fused in their minds. But with practice, you can learn to separate them. Here's where it gets really interesting. When you start practicing this separation between events and judgments, you begin to realize that most of your emotional suffering is self-created. You're not actually suffering because of what happened to you, you're suffering because of what you're telling yourself about what happened to you. Let me give you another example. Let's say someone you care about criticizes you harshly. The objective event is, words were spoken that expressed disapproval of some aspect of your behavior or character. Sound waves traveled through the air and reached your ears. Your brain processed these sounds into meaningful language. This is the factual objective event. But immediately, your mind might start creating a story. They don't really love me. They think I'm worthless. They're going to leave me. I'm fundamentally flawed. I can never do anything right. Everyone secretly thinks I'm terrible. I should just give up trying. These thoughts create real emotional pain, but notice that the pain is coming from the story, not from the original words. A person trained in Stoic principles would handle this differently. They would hear the criticism and ask themselves several questions. Is there truth in what they're saying that I can learn from? Is this criticism coming from their own pain or frustration rather than an accurate assessment of me? Does this person's opinion actually matter to my sense of self-worth? Am I making this criticism mean more than it actually means? What would I tell a friend who received similar criticism? By asking these questions, by separating the event from their judgment of the event, they maintain their emotional equilibrium while still being open to any useful feedback the criticism might contain. This is incredibly liberating once you get the hang of it. You start to realize that you have much more control over your emotional experience than you ever imagined. You can't control what people say to you, but you can control what you make it mean. You can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you interpret what happens to you. But let's go even deeper. The fourth part of this ancient trick involves understanding what the Stoics called the discipline of desire. This is about learning to want what happens rather than trying to make what you want happen. I know this sounds paradoxical, maybe even impossible, but stay with me. The discipline of desire is based on a profound insight about the nature of suffering. All suffering comes from wanting reality to be different from what it is. Think about this for a moment. Every time you've been emotionally hurt, wasn't it because something happened that you didn't want to happen, or something didn't happen that you wanted to happen? Your partner broke up with you, but you wanted them to stay. You didn't get the promotion, but you wanted it badly. Your friend betrayed your confidence, but you wanted them to be trustworthy. Your parent died, but you wanted them to live longer. You got sick, but you wanted to stay healthy. Someone treated you rudely, but you wanted them to be respectful. You made a mistake, but you wanted to be perfect. In every case, the suffering came from the gap between what you wanted and what actually occurred. The larger the gap, the greater the suffering. The more attached you were to your desired outcome, the more painful it was when that outcome didn't materialize. Now, the conventional approach to this problem is to get better at making what you want happen. Work harder, be more persuasive, try to control circumstances and other people more effectively. Develop better strategies, improve your skills, increase your influence, and there's nothing wrong with putting effort into achieving your goals. The Stoics weren't advocating for passivity or laziness. But the Stoic approach adds another dimension, learning to align your wants with reality. This doesn't mean becoming passive or giving up on your goals. It means holding your goals lightly, being fully committed to the process while being unattached to the outcome. It means developing the ability to genuinely want whatever happens, because you trust that whatever happens is part of a larger order that you may not fully understand but that you can learn to accept. I know this sounds almost mystical, but it's actually very practical. Let me explain how this works in real life. Imagine you're interviewing for your dream job. The conventional approach would be to want the job desperately, to attach your self-worth and happiness to getting it, to be devastated if you don't get it. You might spend weeks or months beforehand imagining how perfect your life will be once you get this job. You might make all your future plans contingent on getting it. You might tell everyone about it and build up their expectations as well as your own. The Stoic approach would be different. You would prepare thoroughly, you would give your best effort in the interview, you would genuinely hope to get the position. But you would also cultivate the attitude that whatever happens is ultimately what should happen. If you get the job, wonderful. If you don't get the job, that's also wonderful, because it means either there's something better waiting for you, or you needed to learn something from this experience, or this particular job wasn't actually right for you even though you thought it was, or the person who did get the job needed it more than you did. This might sound like rationalization or self-deception, but it's actually based on a sophisticated understanding of how reality works. The Stoics believed in what they called logos, a rational principle that governs the universe. They believed that everything that happens for a reason, and that this reason is ultimately beneficial even when we can't see how. You don't have to believe in their metaphysics to benefit from this practice. You can simply adopt the working assumption that reality is always giving you exactly what you need for your growth and development, even when it doesn't feel that way in the moment. Here's a personal story that illustrates this principle. A few years ago, I was in a relationship that I thought was perfect. I was convinced this person was the one, and I was planning our future together. I had built my entire vision of happiness around this relationship. I thought about the house we would buy, the trips we would take, the life we would build together. Then, out of nowhere, they broke up with me. I was devastated. For weeks, I couldn't understand why this was happening. I kept thinking, this is wrong. This shouldn't be happening. We were so good together. This person was perfect for me. My whole future is ruined. But as time passed, I began to see things differently. I realized that I had been so focused on this relationship that I had neglected other important areas of my life. I had stopped growing as an individual because I was so comfortable in the relationship. I had been defining my worth through this other person's approval. I had been avoiding some difficult conversations with myself about what I really wanted in life. I had become dependent on another person for my happiness. The breakup, as painful as it was, forced me to confront these issues. It led to a period of tremendous personal growth that I wouldn't have experienced otherwise. I rediscovered interests I had abandoned. I strengthened friendships I had neglected. I pursued goals I had postponed. I learned to be happy on my own. Looking back now, I can honestly say that I'm grateful for that breakup. Not because I didn't love that person, but because it was exactly what I needed at that time to become who I was meant to become. The pain I experienced wasn't caused by the breakup itself. It was caused by my resistance to the breakup, by my insistence that it shouldn't be happening. This is what the discipline of desire teaches us, how to want what happens rather than fighting against what happens. And when you develop this capacity, something amazing occurs. You become emotionally invulnerable not because you don't care about anything, but because you trust that whatever happens is ultimately for your benefit. Let's talk about the fifth part of this ancient trick, the practice of negative visualization in daily life. I mentioned this earlier in the context of relationships, but it applies to every area of your existence. The Stoics regularly practiced imagining the loss of everything they valued: their health, their wealth, their loved ones, their abilities, their reputation, their life itself. This might sound morbid, but it serves several important functions. First, it helps you appreciate what you have while you have it. When you regularly contemplate the possibility of losing your eyesight, you become more grateful for the gift of vision. When you imagine the death of your parents, you become more appreciative of the time you have with them now. When you consider the possibility of losing your health, you're more grateful for your current physical abilities. We have a tendency to take things for granted when we have them consistently. The Stoics understood that this tendency leads to decreased appreciation and increased anxiety about loss. By regularly contemplating loss, we increase our appreciation while decreasing our anxiety. Second, negative visualization prepares you psychologically for inevitable losses. Everything in life is temporary. Your health will eventually decline, your loved ones will eventually die, your possessions will eventually be lost or destroyed, your abilities will eventually diminish, and you yourself will eventually die. These are not pessimistic thoughts. They're simply facts. By regularly contemplating these facts with acceptance rather than denial, you build psychological resilience. Most people try to avoid thinking about these realities, but this avoidance actually makes them more vulnerable when losses do occur. It's like refusing to learn to swim because you don't want to think about the possibility of falling into water. The refusal to prepare doesn't prevent the possibility. It just leaves you less equipped to handle it. Third, and perhaps most importantly, negative visualization helps you detach from outcomes while still caring about them. This is a subtle but crucial distinction. You can love someone deeply while accepting that you might lose them. You can work hard for a goal while accepting that you might not achieve it. You can enjoy your possessions while accepting that they might be taken away. This kind of detachment is not coldness or indifference. It's actually a deeper form of love, because it's love without the desperate clinging that causes so much suffering. When you love someone without being attached to keeping them, you can love them more freely. When you pursue a goal without being attached to achieving it, you can pursue it more joyfully. Let me give you a practical exercise in negative visualization. Right now, think about something you really value in your life. It could be your health, a relationship, your career, your home, your ability to see or hear or walk, your mental faculties, whatever is most important to you. Now, imagine losing it. Don't just think about it intellectually. Really imagine it. How would you feel? What would you do? How would you cope? What would you focus on instead? What would become important to you? The first time you do this exercise, you'll probably feel some anxiety or sadness. That's normal and even beneficial. It shows you how much you value what you have. But as you practice it regularly, something interesting happens. You start to realize that even if you lost this thing you value, you would be okay. You would survive. You would find a way to be happy again. You would adapt. You would discover other sources of meaning and joy. This realization is incredibly liberating because it means that your happiness and well-being don't actually depend on any external circumstance. Yes, you prefer to have the things you value, but your fundamental capacity for contentment doesn't depend on them. This brings us to the sixth part of the ancient trick, understanding the illusion of attachment. Most people think that their happiness depends on maintaining their current circumstances, keeping their job, staying in their relationship, maintaining their health, holding on to their possessions. But this is an illusion that creates constant anxiety and suffering. The truth is that your capacity for happiness, peace, and fulfillment is independent of your external circumstances. This doesn't mean that circumstances don't matter at all, but it means that they don't determine your inner state. You can be happy in poverty and miserable in wealth. You can be content alone and anxious in a relationship. You can find peace in illness and be tormented despite perfect health. The Stoics understood this deeply, Some of the greatest Stoic philosophers faced tremendous hardships. Epictetus was a slave for much of his life, yet he wrote about freedom and happiness. Seneca was exiled and eventually forced to commit suicide, yet he maintained his philosophical composure. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire while dealing with constant wars, plagues, and personal losses, yet his writings reveal a man of profound inner peace. This is not just philosophical theory, it's practical psychology. Modern research in happiness and well-being confirms what the Stoics taught 2,000 years ago. Once your basic needs are met, your level of satisfaction with life depends much more on your internal factors, your attitude, your perspective, your values, your relationships, your sense of purpose, than on your external circumstances. Studies of lottery winners show that they're not significantly happier a year after winning than they were before. Studies of people who become paralyzed show that they adapt and return to baseline levels of happiness within a few years. Studies of people in different countries with vastly different standards of living show surprisingly small differences in reported life satisfaction. But here's where most people get stuck. They intellectually understand that happiness comes from within, but they still behave as if it comes from without. They still organize their entire lives around trying to control external circumstances, and they still suffer when those circumstances don't match their preferences. The ancient trick to never getting hurt again requires a fundamental shift in how you relate to your circumstances. Instead of seeing yourself as a victim of your circumstances, you learn to see yourself as the creator of your experience of those circumstances. Instead of trying to control what happens to you, you focus on controlling your response to what happens to you. This leads us to the seventh part of the trick, developing what the Stoics called prosos, or continuous attention. This is the practice of moment-to-moment awareness of your thoughts, emotions, and reactions. It's about catching yourself in the act of creating suffering and choosing a different response. Most people go through life on autopilot. Something happens, they react emotionally, they create a story about what it means, they suffer, and they never examine this process. They just accept that certain events make them feel certain ways. But when you develop continuous attention, you start to see the gap between stimulus and response, and in that gap you find your freedom. Let me give you an example of how this works. Let's say you're walking down the street and someone cuts in front of you rudely, perhaps bumping into you without apologizing. The automatic response might be irritation or anger. Your mind might immediately start creating a story. That person is so rude. They have no consideration for others. They think they're more important than everyone else. People are so selfish these days. But if you're practicing continuous attention, you might catch yourself in that moment and think, interesting, I'm feeling irritated. This person's behavior triggered a judgment in me, that they're being disrespectful, but their behavior actually has nothing to do with me personally. They might be late for an important appointment, or they might not have even seen me, or they might be dealing with some personal crisis, or they might come from a culture with different norms about personal space. This moment of awareness gives you a choice. You can continue with the automatic irritation, or you can choose a different response. You might choose understanding, or indifference, or even compassion. You might think, whatever's going on with this person, I hope they find what they're looking for and that their day improves. The point is that you have a choice. And most people don't realize they have this choice because they're not paying attention to their own mental processes. They're so identified with their automatic reactions that they think those reactions are inevitable and justified. Developing this kind of continuous attention takes practice, but it's incredibly powerful. You start to realize that you're not actually at the mercy of your emotions. Emotions arise, but you don't have to be carried away by them. You can observe them, understand where they're coming from, and choose how to respond. This is the essence of emotional mastery. It's not about suppressing emotions or pretending they don't exist. It's about understanding them, learning from them, and choosing how to express them in ways that serve you rather than harm you. Think about emotions as information rather than commands. When you feel angry, that's information that something has violated your expectations or values. But you don't have to act on that anger in destructive ways. You can use the information to understand yourself better and to respond more skillfully. When you feel sad, that's information that you've lost something you valued or that you're longing for something you don't have. But you don't have to be overwhelmed by that sadness. You can honor it, learn from it, and choose how to move forward. When you feel afraid, that's information that you perceive a threat to something you care about. But you don't have to be paralyzed by that fear. You can assess whether the threat is real and proportionate, and you can choose how to respond courageously. The eighth part of the ancient trick involves what the Stoics called memento mori, remembering death. This might seem morbid, but it's actually one of the most life-affirming practices you can adopt. When you regularly remember that your time here is limited, that this life is temporary, that everyone you love will eventually die, it puts everything in perspective. Those daily annoyances that used to upset you suddenly seem trivial. That argument with your spouse about who should take out the trash becomes less important when you remember that someday one of you will be gone and the other would give anything just to have that person back, even if they never took out the trash again. That disappointment about not getting the promotion becomes less devastating when you remember that your career, important as it is just one small part of a brief existence. Think about how differently you would treat people if you knew it was the last time you would see them. You'd probably be more patient, more loving, more present. You'd probably worry less about their flaws and appreciate more their unique qualities. You'd probably say the things you've been meaning to say and do the things you've been meaning to do. Remembering death is not about becoming morbid or depressed. It's about gaining perspective on what really matters. When you truly internalize the temporary nature of everything, you become both more detached and more loving. You care deeply about things while holding them lightly. You invest fully in life while accepting that it's all impermanent. This perspective is incredibly liberating because it frees you from the tyranny of minor disappointments and setbacks. When you remember that you're going to die, that everyone you know is going to die, that human civilization itself is temporary, that the earth will eventually be consumed by the sun, it becomes much easier to accept the small difficulties of daily life. But paradoxically, this cosmic perspective also makes life more precious and meaningful. Every moment becomes valuable because there are only a limited number of them. Every relationship becomes sacred because it's temporary. Every experience becomes significant because you won't have infinite opportunities to repeat it. The Stoics practiced daily reminders of mortality. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his personal journal, "You could die today. Let this determine what you do and say and think." This wasn't meant to create anxiety, but to create clarity about priorities. When you remember that your time is limited, you're less likely to waste it on trivial pursuits or petty conflicts. You're more likely to focus on what's truly important, developing your character, loving the people in your life, contributing something meaningful to the world, enjoying the simple pleasures that are available to you right now. The ninth part of the ancient trick is learning to see obstacles as opportunities. The Stoics had a beautiful phrase: "The impediment to action advances action." What stands in the way becomes the way. This is about developing the ability to find benefit in every situation, no matter how challenging it might seem. When something goes wrong in your life, when you face a setback or disappointment, when someone treats you badly, when you lose something you value, the natural response is to see these as problems to be solved or avoided. But the Stoic approach is to see them as opportunities for growth, for learning, for developing character. This isn't about toxic positivity or denying the real challenges you face. It's about training yourself to look for the hidden benefits in every situation. And here's the remarkable thing. When you start looking for these benefits, you almost always find them. Not because they weren't there before, but because you weren't looking for them. Let's say you lose your job unexpectedly. The conventional response would be to see this as a disaster, to panic about your financial future, to be angry at your employer, to feel sorry for yourself. But if you've learned to see obstacles as opportunities, you might respond differently. You might see this as a chance to reassess your career goals, to develop new skills, to start that business you've always dreamed about, to spend more time with your family, to learn resilience and resourcefulness, to network in new ways, to explore different industries, to pursue education you've been postponing, to volunteer for causes you care about, to travel or take a sabbatical, to write that book you've been thinking about. None of this means that losing your job isn't challenging or that you shouldn't take practical steps to find new employment. But it means that even in this challenging situation, there are opportunities for growth and positive change if you're willing to look for them. Or let's say someone you trusted betrays you. The conventional response would be to focus on their wrongdoing, to feel victimized, to become bitter or cynical about human nature. But if you're practiced in seeing obstacles as opportunities, you might respond differently. You might see this as an opportunity to learn better discernment about who to trust, to develop stronger boundaries, to become more self-reliant, to practice forgiveness, to understand human psychology more deeply, to appreciate the people in your life who are trustworthy, to develop compassion for the flaws and struggles that lead people to betray others. This practice transforms your relationship with adversity. Instead of seeing difficulties as things that happen to you, you start seeing them as things that happen for you. Instead of being a victim of circumstances, you become a student of circumstances. This shift in perspective is incredibly empowering because it means that nothing can truly harm you as long as you can learn from it. The 10th part of the ancient trick involves understanding the nature of opinion and reputation. Most people suffer tremendously because they care too much about what others think of them. They organize their entire lives around trying to create a good impression, avoid criticism, and maintain a positive reputation. But this is a form of slavery that causes immense suffering. The Stoics taught that other people's opinions of you are completely outside of your control, and therefore not worth worrying about. You cannot control what people think of you, what they say about you, or how they react to you. These things depend on their own psychology, their own biases, their own experiences and preferences, their own moods and circumstances. Trying to control other people's opinions is like trying to control the weather, frustrating, and ultimately futile. But more importantly, other people's opinions of you are not actually about you. They're about the image of you that exists in their minds, which is based on limited information filtered through their own psychological lens. This image may have little relationship to who you actually are. Someone might dislike you because you remind them of someone who hurt them in the past. Someone might criticize you because they're jealous of something you have. Someone might praise you because they want something from you. Someone might judge you based on a single interaction or a rumor they heard. Someone might project their own insecurities onto you. When you truly understand this, you become free from the exhausting task of trying to manage other people's perceptions. You can focus instead on being authentic, on living according to your own values, on becoming the person you want to be regardless of what others think about it. This doesn't mean you should be completely indifferent to feedback from others. Some people may have insights about your behavior that could help you grow, but you learn to evaluate feedback based on its merit, not based on whether it makes you feel good or bad. You learn to consider the source, to look for patterns, to extract what's useful and discard what's not. For example, if multiple people who know you well tell you that you interrupt others frequently, that might be valuable feedback worth considering, regardless of how it makes you feel. But if a stranger criticizes your appearance, or a jealous colleague questions your competence, you can evaluate those opinions based on their source and motivation, rather than taking them personally. The key is to develop what the Stoics called an internal scorecard, rather than an external scorecard. Instead of measuring your worth based on others' approval, you measure it based on your own values and standards. Instead of seeking validation from others, you validate yourself by living authentically and ethically. This is incredibly liberating, because it means you're no longer at the mercy of other people's moods, biases, and agendas. You're no longer trapped in the exhausting cycle of trying to please everyone, which is impossible anyway, since different people want different things from you. The 11th part of the ancient trick is learning to love fate. The Stoics called this amor fati, not just accepting what happens, but actually loving what happens. This might seem impossible, especially when discussing difficult experiences like illness, loss, or betrayal, but it's actually the ultimate expression of wisdom and the final key to emotional invulnerability. Loving fate doesn't mean being happy about everything that happens. It means recognizing that everything that happens to you, pleasant or unpleasant, is part of your unique path through life. It means understanding that your difficulties and challenges are not bugs in the system, but features of the system. They're not mistakes or accidents, but necessary elements of your growth and development. When you learn to love fate, you develop what I like to call grateful acceptance of your entire life experience. You become grateful not just for the good things that happen to you, but for the difficult things as well, because you recognize that both are necessary for becoming who you're meant to become. This is perhaps the most radical and transformative aspect of Stoic philosophy. When you can genuinely say, I love my life exactly as it is, including all the painful parts, you become invulnerable to emotional suffering. Not because you don't care about anything, but because you trust that everything that happens is ultimately serving your highest good. Let me share a story that illustrates this principle. I once knew a woman who was diagnosed with a serious illness in her 40s. Initially, she was devastated. She was angry, afraid, and depressed. She kept asking, "Why me? Why now? This isn't fair. I've taken care of myself. I've been a good person." She went through all the stages of grief and resistance. But over time, as she dealt with her illness, something remarkable happened. She began to see how the illness was actually improving her life in unexpected ways. It forced her to slow down and appreciate simple pleasures she had been too busy to notice before. The taste of food, the warmth of sunlight, the sound of birds singing, the feeling of her daughter's hand in hers. It deepened her relationships because people rallied around her with love and support, and she learned to receive help gracefully instead of always being the one helping others. It clarified her priorities and helped her focus on what really mattered: spending time with loved ones, pursuing creative interests she had postponed, appreciating beauty, practicing gratitude. It gave her a sense of urgency that motivated her to pursue dreams she had been postponing. She wrote a book, traveled to places she had always wanted to visit, had conversations with family members about things that had never been discussed, forgave people she had been holding grudges against. It taught her about her own strength and resilience. She discovered that she was capable of handling much more than she had ever imagined. It connected her with other people facing similar challenges and allowed her to help them, giving her a sense of purpose and meaning that her previous career hadn't provided. It made her more compassionate and less judgmental. Having faced her own mortality and vulnerability, she became more understanding of others' struggles and less critical of their imperfections. By the time I spoke with her about her experience, she could honestly say that she was grateful for her illness. Not because she enjoyed being sick, but because she could see how it had made her a better, wiser, more compassionate person. She could see how it had led to experiences and insights that she never would have had otherwise. She had learned to love her fate, including the difficult parts. This is what's possible when you fully embrace the Stoic approach to life. You can reach a point where you're genuinely grateful for everything that happens to you, because you understand that it's all part of a larger pattern that's ultimately beneficial, even when you can't see how, in the moment. Now, let's talk about how to actually implement these ideas in your daily life. Understanding these concepts intellectually is one thing, but developing the ability to apply them consistently is another. Like any skill, it requires practice, patience, and persistence. The first step is to start paying attention to your emotional reactions throughout the day. When you notice yourself feeling upset, hurt, angry, or anxious, pause and ask yourself, what am I telling myself about this situation that's causing me to feel this way? What expectation or judgment am I holding that's not being met by reality? For example, if you're feeling hurt because a friend canceled plans with you at the last minute, you might realize that you're telling yourself, they don't respect my time. They don't care about me as much as I care about them. I can't count on them. This always happens to me. People always disappoint me. These thoughts are causing your emotional pain, not the cancellation itself. Once you identify these thoughts, you can examine them. Are they necessarily true? Are there other possible explanations for your friend's behavior? Are you making the situation mean more than it actually means? Could there be benefits to having your evening free that you hadn't considered? Maybe your friend had a family emergency. Maybe they're dealing with depression and struggling to maintain social commitments. Maybe they're overwhelmed at work and trying to manage their energy. Maybe they're having financial problems and feel embarrassed about going out. Maybe they're sick and don't want to get you sick. And even if they did cancel simply because they didn't feel like going out, is that really about you? People have different energy levels, different social needs, different ways of managing stress. Their choices are about them, not about you. This process of examining your automatic thoughts and judgments is the foundation of emotional freedom. It's not about convincing yourself that everything is wonderful when it's not. It's about seeing situations more clearly, without the distortion of your unconscious expectations and interpretations. The second step is to practice the dichotomy of control daily. Whenever you're facing a challenging situation, ask yourself, what aspects of this situation are up to me, and what aspects are not up to me? Then commit to focusing entirely on what's up to you, while accepting completely what's not up to you. For instance, if you're worried about a job interview, recognize that the interviewer's decision is not up to you. Their personality, their mood, their preferences, their biases, the other candidates they're considering, the company's budget constraints, their timeline for hiring. None of these things are up to you. But your preparation, your attitude, your authenticity, your effort, your follow-up, your willingness to learn from the experience regardless of the outcome, these things are up to you. Focus entirely on these controllable factors and let go of attachment to the outcome. You can prepare thoroughly by researching the company, practicing your answers to common questions, preparing thoughtful questions to ask them, choosing appropriate attire, getting a good night's sleep, arriving early. You can approach the interview with confidence and enthusiasm. Be genuine and honest in your responses. Listen carefully to their questions. Ask for clarification when needed. If you don't get the job, you can ask for feedback, learn from the experience, and apply those lessons to future interviews. If you do get the job, you can be grateful while recognizing that your worth isn't determined by this outcome. The third step is to practice negative visualization regularly. Set aside a few minutes each day to imagine losing something you value. This might feel uncomfortable at first, but remember that you're not trying to make these things happen. You're simply preparing yourself psychologically for the changes and losses that are inevitable in life while learning to appreciate what you have while you have it. You might imagine losing your health and think about how you would adapt, what you would focus on, how you might find meaning and purpose, even with physical limitations. Would you develop closer relationships? Would you pursue creative interests that don't require physical ability? Would you become an advocate for others with similar conditions? Would you develop spiritual practices? Would you focus on leaving a legacy through your words or wisdom? You might imagine losing your relationship and consider how you would cope, what you would learn about yourself, how you might grow from the experience. Would you discover interests you had neglected? Would you strengthen friendships? Would you learn to be comfortable alone? Would you develop greater self-reliance? Would you become clearer about what you want in future relationships? You might imagine losing your job and think about what opportunities might emerge, what skills you might develop, how you might redirect your career. Would you start that business you've been thinking about? Would you go back to school? Would you relocate to a place you've always wanted to live? Would you volunteer for a cause you care about? Would you take time to write or create? The goal is not to become pessimistic or anxious about these possibilities. The goal is to develop equanimity about them, to realize that you would be okay even if they happened, and to appreciate your current circumstances more deeply. The fourth step is to practice seeing obstacles as opportunities. When something goes wrong in your life, when you face a setback or disappointment, train yourself to ask, how might this be serving me? What might this be trying to teach me? How could this difficulty actually be a gift in disguise? This takes practice because it goes against our natural tendency to see problems as problems. But the more you practice this reframing, the more automatic it becomes. You start to develop a genuine trust that everything that happens to you is somehow serving your growth and development, even when you can't see how immediately. Let's say you get into a car accident. The conventional response would be to focus on the inconvenience, the expense, the potential injuries, the disruption to your schedule. But if you're practicing this reframe, you might also ask, what might this be teaching me? Am I being reminded to slow down and be more present? Am I being shown the importance of gratitude for my usual health and mobility? Am I being given an opportunity to practice patience and acceptance? Am I being connected with helpful people like mechanics, insurance agents, or medical professionals? Am I being shown the kindness of strangers who stop to help? Or let's say you experience a friendship breakup. The conventional response would be to focus on the loss, the hurt feelings, the sense of betrayal or abandonment. But if you're practicing this reframe, you might also ask, what might this be teaching me about boundaries, about compatibility, about my own growth areas, about the temporary nature of all relationships? Am I being freed up to invest in other friendships that might be more fulfilling? Am I being shown the importance of being a good friend to myself? The fifth step is to gradually reduce your attachment to others' opinions. Start by choosing one area of your life where you typically worry about what others think, and practice acting according to your own values, regardless of potential judgment. This might be wearing clothes you like, but that others might find unusual, expressing an unpopular opinion in a social situation, pursuing a hobby that others might consider weird, saying no to requests that don't align with your priorities, choosing a career path that others don't understand, making lifestyle choices that differ from your family's expectations. The goal is not to be deliberately offensive or inconsiderate, but to free yourself from the exhausting task of trying to manage everyone's perceptions of you. As you practice this, you'll likely discover that most people are so focused on their own lives and concerns that they're not paying nearly as much attention to you as you thought they were. You might also discover that the people whose opinions you most value often respect you more when you're authentic, even if they don't always agree with your choices. And you might find that worrying less about others' opinions actually makes you more confident and likable. The sixth step is to develop a daily practice of remembering death and impermanence. This doesn't have to be morbid or depressing. You might simply remind yourself each morning that this day is a gift, that you have a limited number of days left, and that everyone you love is also temporary. You might end each day by reflecting on what you're grateful for and acknowledging that none of it is permanent. You might regularly visit cemeteries and reflect on the lives of people who came before you. You might keep a photo of an elderly version of yourself as a reminder of your aging process. You might practice imagining your own funeral and thinking about what you'd want people to say about how you lived. This practice helps you maintain perspective on what's truly important and reduces your attachment to minor disappointments and setbacks. When you remember that your time here is limited, you're less likely to waste emotional energy on things that don't really matter. Now, I want to address some common objections to these ideas, because I know that some of what I've shared might seem counterintuitive or even disturbing to modern sensibilities. The first objection is, this sounds cold and unfeeling. If I stop caring about outcomes, won't I become apathetic and unmotivated? This is a misunderstanding of what detachment means in the Stoic sense. Stoic detachment is not about not caring. It's about caring without clinging. It's about being fully engaged with life while maintaining inner equilibrium. Think about a skilled surgeon. They care deeply about their patient's well-being. They prepare thoroughly. They focus completely during the operation. They do everything in their power to ensure a successful outcome. But they also accept that there are factors beyond their control: the patient's overall health, unexpected complications, the limits of current medical knowledge. Their caring doesn't depend on achieving a perfect outcome every time. This is the kind of engaged detachment that Stoicism teaches. You can be passionate about your goals while accepting that you might not achieve them. You can love deeply while accepting that you might lose the people you love. You can invest fully in your career while accepting that setbacks and failures are part of the process. In fact, this kind of detachment often makes you more effective, not less. When you're not paralyzed by fear of failure or desperate need for a particular outcome, you can think more clearly, act more authentically, and respond more flexibly to changing circumstances. Think about athletes who perform best under pressure. They care deeply about winning, but they're not attached to the outcome in a way that creates anxiety. They're focused on their performance, their preparation, their effort, the things they can control. This allows them to play freely and creatively rather than tensely and defensively. The second objection is, this sounds like giving up or being passive. If I accept everything that happens, won't I stop trying to improve my life? Again, this misunderstands the Stoic position. Acceptance doesn't mean passivity. It means accepting reality as your starting point, while taking full responsibility for your response to reality. The Stoics were actually quite active in trying to improve their circumstances and help others. Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor who worked tirelessly to govern justly and effectively. He dealt with wars, plagues, political challenges, and personal losses while maintaining his philosophical principles. Seneca was a successful businessman and advisor who contributed significantly to Roman society while also writing extensively about philosophy. Epictetus, despite being a slave for much of his life, founded a school and taught students who came from all over the Roman world. The difference is that they didn't attach their peace of mind to achieving particular outcomes. They did their best in every situation while accepting that the results were ultimately beyond their complete control. This actually freed them to be more creative, more persistent, and more resilient in pursuing their goals. When you're not desperately attached to a specific outcome, you can consider more options, take calculated risks, learn from failures without being devastated by them, and persist through setbacks without losing hope. The third objection is, this sounds selfish. If I'm only focused on my own inner state, won't I stop caring about others and the world's problems? This is also a misunderstanding. Stoicism actually promotes a deep sense of connection with others and responsibility for the common good. When you're not constantly tormented by your own emotional suffering, you have more energy and clarity to help others. When you're not desperately trying to get your own needs met, you can be more generous and compassionate. When you understand that everyone is struggling with the same fundamental challenges, trying to be happy, trying to avoid suffering, trying to find meaning, you naturally develop empathy and compassion. The Stoics talked about the concept of cosmopolitanism, seeing yourself as a citizen of the world, with obligations not just to your immediate circle but to all of humanity. They believed that personal virtue and social responsibility went hand in hand. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about his duty to serve the common good, even when it was difficult or thankless. Seneca used his wealth and influence to help others and to promote justice. Epictetus taught about the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect, regardless of their social status. When you're emotionally stable and secure, you're actually more capable of genuine love and service to others. You're not constantly seeking validation or trying to fill emotional voids through your relationships. You can love others for their own sake, rather than for what they can give you. The fourth objection is, this sounds unrealistic. It's just not possible for humans to be unaffected by loss and disappointment. And you know what? This objection has some validity. Perfect stoic, sage-like equanimity is probably not achievable for most people most of the time. The Stoics themselves acknowledged this. They saw the ideal of the sage as something to aspire toward rather than something that could be perfectly achieved. But here's the thing. You don't have to be perfect to benefit enormously from these practices. Even moving partway toward this ideal can dramatically reduce your suffering and increase your peace of mind. Even understanding these concepts intellectually can change how you relate to difficulties. The goal is not to become emotionless or invulnerable. The goal is to become more resilient, more wise, more able to maintain your equilibrium in the face of life's inevitable challenges. Every step in this direction is valuable, even if you never reach perfect mastery. Think of it like physical fitness. You don't have to become an Olympic athlete to benefit from exercise. Even moderate improvements in your physical condition can significantly enhance your health, energy, and quality of life. Similarly, even moderate improvements in your emotional fitness can significantly enhance your peace of mind, relationships, and overall life satisfaction. Let me share some additional practical exercises that can help you develop these capacities gradually. The morning reflection. Each morning, take a few minutes to remind yourself of the basic Stoic principles. You might say something like, "Today things will happen that I cannot control. People will behave in ways I don't expect or prefer. Circumstances will arise that challenge my preferences. I cannot control these external events, but I can control my responses to them. I will focus on what's up to me, my choices, my effort, my attitude, my character. I will accept what's not up to me while doing my best to respond wisely and virtuously. The evening review. Each evening, reflect on your day. When did you maintain your equanimity? When did you get caught up in emotional reactions? What triggered you? And what were you telling yourself that created suffering? How could you have responded differently? What did you learn? This practice helps you gradually become more aware of your patterns and more skillful in your responses. The obstacle reframe. Whenever you encounter a difficulty or setback, practice asking, how is this serving me? What is this trying to teach me? How might this apparent obstacle actually be an opportunity? Don't force false positivity, but genuinely look for the potential benefits or lessons in challenging situations. The impermanence meditation. Regularly contemplate the temporary nature of everything in your life. Look at your possessions, and remember that they will eventually be gone. Think about your relationships and acknowledge that they will all end someday. Consider your own life and accept that it too is temporary. This practice helps reduce attachment while increasing appreciation. The opinion investigation. When you notice yourself getting upset about someone's judgment or criticism, investigate your reaction. Ask yourself, why does this person's opinion matter to me? What am I making their opinion mean about me? Is their opinion actually accurate? Does this person really know me well enough to judge me? Am I giving away my power by letting their opinion determine my emotional state? The control analysis. Whenever you're feeling stressed or upset about a situation, make 2 lists. In the first list, write down everything about the situation that's not up to you. In the second list, write down everything that is up to you. Then commit to focusing entirely on the second list while accepting completely everything on the first list. The gratitude practice. Each day, identify something you're grateful for that you typically take for granted. This might be your health, your relationships, your abilities, your circumstances, or even difficulties that have helped you grow. This practice helps you appreciate what you have while you have it. The perspective practice. When you're upset about something, ask yourself, will this matter in 5 years? In 50 years? In the grand scheme of human history? This helps you gain perspective on whether your current concern deserves the emotional energy you're giving it. The character focus. Instead of asking, how can I get what I want? Ask, how can I respond to this situation in a way that develops my character? Focus on virtues like wisdom, justice, courage, and self-discipline rather than on external outcomes. The acceptance meditation. Practice saying, this is what's happening right now, about situations you're resisting. This doesn't mean you have to like what's happening, but it means acknowledging reality as your starting point for any response. Now, let's talk about how these practices apply to specific areas of life where people commonly experience emotional pain. In relationships, the ancient trick to never getting hurt again involves loving without attachment. This means caring deeply about people while accepting that you cannot control their choices, their feelings, or their behavior toward you. It means investing fully in relationships while accepting that all relationships are temporary and that people will sometimes disappoint you. When someone you love hurts you, instead of focusing on what they did wrong or how they should have behaved differently, focus on your own response. Ask yourself, what expectation was I holding that wasn't met? How can I love this person while protecting myself appropriately? What boundaries do I need to set? How can I maintain my own emotional equilibrium while still caring about them? This doesn't mean accepting abuse or mistreatment. It means recognizing that other people's behavior is about them, not about you, and that your emotional well-being doesn't depend on their treating you perfectly. You can choose to distance yourself from people who consistently treat you poorly while still maintaining your inner peace. For example, if your partner criticizes you harshly, you can respond by saying something like, I hear that you're upset about this. I want to understand your perspective, but I need you to speak to me respectfully. If you're too angry to do that right now, let's take a break and talk about this when we've both calmed down. You're setting a boundary while remaining open to communication. Or if a friend consistently cancels plans at the last minute, you might say, I understand that things come up, but when plans are canceled frequently, it's hard for me to rely on them. I'd prefer to make more flexible arrangements or maybe check in the day before to confirm. You're addressing the issue without attacking their character. In career and financial matters, the ancient trick involves pursuing your goals while accepting that success is not entirely up to you. You can work hard, develop your skills, make good decisions, and still not achieve the outcomes you want due to factors beyond your control: economic conditions, other people's preferences, timing, luck, technological changes, industry disruptions. When you face professional setbacks or financial challenges, instead of seeing them as disasters, practice seeing them as information and opportunities. Ask yourself, what is this situation teaching me? How might this redirect me towards something better? What skills am I developing by dealing with this challenge? How is this experience preparing me for future opportunities? If you get passed over for a promotion, you might ask, what feedback can I get about areas for improvement? Are there skills I need to develop? Would a different role or company be a better fit for me? Is this organization actually aligned with my values? What other opportunities might be available to me? If you experience financial difficulties, you might ask, what is this teaching me about money management? About priorities? About resilience? About creativity in finding solutions? About asking for help? About appreciating what I have? About distinguishing between needs and wants? In health matters, the ancient trick involves taking good care of yourself while accepting that you cannot completely control your physical condition. You can eat well, exercise, get regular medical care, manage stress, and still develop health problems due to genetics, aging, accidents, environmental factors, or other circumstances beyond your control. When you face health challenges, instead of asking, "Why me?" or fighting against the reality of your condition, practice accepting it as your current situation while focusing on what you can do to adapt and thrive within these constraints. Ask yourself, how can I live well with this condition? What opportunities for growth does this present? How might this experience deepen my compassion for others? What aspects of my health can I still influence? If you develop a chronic illness, you might focus on what treatments are available, what lifestyle adjustments can I make, what support systems can I develop, how can I maintain my quality of life? What new priorities does this create for me? How can I help others who are dealing with similar challenges? If you experience an injury, you might ask, what can I learn about patience and healing? How can I use this recovery time productively? What alternative activities can I explore? How can I appreciate the abilities I do have? What does this teach me about taking better care of myself? In dealing with loss and grief, the ancient trick involves honoring your feelings while accepting the reality of impermanence. When you lose someone or something important to you, it's natural and appropriate to feel sad. The Stoics weren't advocating for emotional numbness, but you can grieve without adding unnecessary suffering through resistance to reality. Instead of thinking, this shouldn't have happened, or it's not fair, practice thinking, this is part of life. Everything is temporary. I am grateful for the time I had with this person or thing. This loss is teaching me about the preciousness of what remains. When someone you love dies, you might focus on, what did I learn from this person? How did they influence me for the better? What would they want me to do with my life now? How can I honor their memory? What gifts did they give me that I can share with others? How has loving them made me a better person? When you lose a job, a home, or another important circumstance, you might ask, what did this situation teach me? What opportunities does this change create? How might this be redirecting me towards something better? What have I learned about myself through this experience? How has this increased my empathy for others in similar situations? Let me address one more important aspect of this ancient wisdom: the role of community and philosophy in developing these capacities. The Stoics understood that developing emotional resilience is not a purely individual endeavor. They studied together, discussed these ideas with friends and mentors, and supported each other in practicing these principles. If you're serious about developing these capacities, I encourage you to find others who are interested in similar ideas. This might be a philosophy group, a book club, an online community, or simply friends who are open to discussing these concepts. Having support and accountability makes the practice much easier and more enjoyable. You might start by sharing some of these ideas with people you trust and seeing who resonates with them. You might suggest reading a Stoic text together and discussing it. You might practice some of these exercises with friends and compare notes on what you're learning. I also encourage you to read the original Stoic texts. Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, Epictetus's Discourses, and Enchiridion, and Seneca's letters are all accessible and practical. These philosophers were not writing academic treatises, they were working out these ideas in their own lives and sharing what they learned. Reading their words can be incredibly inspiring and comforting, especially during difficult times. You realize that these fundamental human challenges, dealing with difficult people, facing uncertainty, coping with loss, finding meaning, are not unique to our modern world. People have been struggling with these issues for thousands of years, and some have found ways to maintain peace and wisdom in the midst of it all. Marcus Aurelius, for example, wrote his Meditations while dealing with wars, plagues, political challenges, and personal losses. His writings reveal someone who was constantly practicing these principles in real time. Not someone who had achieved perfect equanimity, but someone who was working toward it daily. Seneca wrote many of his letters while facing exile, political danger, and eventually forced suicide. Yet his writings are full of practical wisdom about how to maintain inner peace regardless of external circumstances. Epictetus taught from the perspective of someone who had experienced slavery and physical disability. Yet his teachings are among the most empowering and optimistic in all of philosophy. Reading these ancient voices reminds you that wisdom is possible, regardless of your circumstances, and that the practices they developed have been tested over centuries by people facing all kinds of challenges. As we come toward the end of our exploration, I want to emphasize that the goal of these practices is not to become a perfect Stoic sage who never experiences emotional disturbance. The goal is to gradually develop more resilience, more wisdom, more ability to maintain your equilibrium when life inevitably presents challenges. Every time you catch yourself in the middle of an emotional reaction and pause to examine what's really happening, you're practicing wisdom. Every time you focus on what you can control instead of worrying about what you can't control, you're developing resilience. Every time you choose acceptance over resistance, you're moving toward peace. These small moments of practice add up over time. You might not notice the changes day by day, but if you commit to these practices consistently, you'll probably find that you're less reactive, less anxious, less prone to drama and emotional suffering. You might find that you're more present, more grateful, more able to appreciate life as it is rather than constantly wishing it were different. And perhaps most importantly, you might find that you're more genuinely loving and compassionate because you're not constantly focused on getting your own emotional needs met. When you're not desperately seeking approval, avoiding criticism, trying to control others, or clinging to things, you have more energy to actually care about others and contribute to the world. This, ultimately, is what the ancient trick to never getting hurt again is really about. It's not about becoming invulnerable or unfeeling. It's about becoming so secure in your own inner stability that you can engage fully with life without being constantly afraid of loss, rejection, failure, or pain. It's about developing such trust in your ability to handle whatever comes that you can love freely, pursue goals passionately, care deeply about others, and invest fully in life while maintaining your equilibrium regardless of outcomes. It's about understanding that your happiness, your peace, your sense of worth, and your capacity for joy are not dependent on external circumstances, but arise from your own character, your own choices, your own relationship with reality. This is perhaps the most liberating realization you can have, that no one and nothing can take away your inner peace unless you give them permission to do so. External events can challenge you, disappoint you, cause you physical pain, create practical difficulties, but they cannot touch your essential self, your capacity for wisdom and virtue, your ability to choose your response. When you truly internalize this understanding, you become like that oak tree in the storm, flexible enough to bend with whatever winds blow, but rooted deeply enough in wisdom and virtue that you cannot be uprooted. You can engage fully with all the joys and sorrows of human existence while maintaining an unshakable core of peace. This is the ancient trick to never getting hurt again. Not because nothing painful will ever happen to you, but because you will have developed the wisdom and strength to meet whatever happens with equanimity, curiosity, and grace. You will have learned to distinguish between pain and suffering, between what happens to you and your interpretation of what happens to you, between what you can control and what you cannot control. And in making these distinctions clearly and consistently, you will have found a kind of freedom that most people never even realize is possible, the freedom to be at peace regardless of circumstances, to love without fear, to pursue goals without desperation, to care deeply while holding lightly, to be fully human while remaining unshakably grounded in wisdom. This is what the Stoics discovered over 2,000 years ago, and it remains as relevant and powerful today as it was then. The external circumstances of life have changed dramatically since ancient Rome, but the fundamental structure of human psychology and the basic challenges of existence remain the same. We still struggle with disappointment, loss, conflict, uncertainty, and the gap between our expectations and reality. But we also still have access to the same inner resources that allowed the Stoics to maintain their peace and wisdom in the face of tremendous challenges. We can still choose our responses to events. We can still distinguish between what's up to us and what's not up to us. We can still practice seeing obstacles as opportunities, holding our goals lightly, loving without attachment, and finding meaning in difficulty. The choice is always yours. You can continue to let external events determine your emotional state, to suffer whenever reality doesn't match your preferences, to be a victim of circumstances, or you can begin practicing these ancient techniques for developing inner resilience and wisdom. Let me share with you some advanced practices that can deepen your understanding and application of these principles. These are for those who have begun to integrate the basic concepts and are ready to go deeper into this transformative work. The practice of voluntary discomfort. The Stoics regularly practiced deliberately exposing themselves to minor hardships, sleeping on the floor occasionally, eating simple foods, wearing less comfortable clothing, taking cold showers, walking instead of driving, when possible. This wasn't masochism, it was training. By voluntarily experiencing small discomforts, you become less attached to comfort and more confident in your ability to handle difficulties when they arise involuntarily. Try this. Once a week, deliberately choose a minor discomfort. Skip a meal and notice how your body and mind react to hunger. Sleep without your usual pillows and observe your attachment to comfort. Take a cold shower and practice maintaining equanimity while experiencing something unpleasant. The goal is not to suffer, but to become less dependent on always having things exactly as you prefer them. The practice of perspective taking. When you're upset about something, practice viewing the situation from different perspectives. How would you see this situation if you were an alien anthropologist studying human behavior? How would it look from the perspective of someone living in poverty in another country? How would it appear to someone who is dying? How will you view this situation in 10 years? This practice helps you see your current concerns in a broader context and often reveals how much energy you're investing in relatively minor issues. The practice of philosophical journaling. Keep a daily journal where you apply Stoic principles to your experiences. When something triggers an emotional reaction, write about it using the framework we've discussed. What aspects of the situation are up to you versus not up to you? What expectations or judgments are creating your suffering? How might this difficulty serve your growth? What would Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus advise in this situation? This practice helps you integrate these ideas more deeply and track your progress over time. The practice of memento mori visualization. Beyond simply remembering that you will die, practice vividly imagining your death. Picture your funeral. Imagine what people will say about how you lived. Consider what you would regret not having done or said. This isn't meant to be morbid, but to clarify your priorities and motivate you to live according to your deepest values. When you truly accept your mortality, you become less concerned with petty matters and more focused on what truly matters. The practice of preferred indifference. The Stoics taught that there are things that are naturally preferred: health over sickness, wealth over poverty, friendship over loneliness. But that these preferences shouldn't determine our happiness or peace of mind. Practice holding your preferences lightly. Yes, you prefer to be healthy, but you can be content even if you become sick. Yes, you prefer to be successful, but your worth doesn't depend on your achievements. This practice helps you maintain perspective and reduces the intensity of your attachment to specific outcomes. The practice of cosmic perspective. Regularly contemplate your place in the vast universe. Consider that you are one person among billions, living for a brief moment in a history that spans millennia, on a small planet in an enormous cosmos. This perspective can be humbling and liberating simultaneously. Your problems, while real and important to you, are incredibly small in the grand scheme of things. This doesn't diminish their significance in your life, but it can help you maintain equanimity about them. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Asia and Europe are but two small corners of the universe." He regularly reminded himself of the vastness of space and time to maintain perspective on his daily challenges. You can do the same by studying astronomy, reading about cosmic history, or simply spending time under the night sky contemplating the stars. The practice of character development focus. Instead of asking, "How can I get what I want?" ask, "How can I use this situation to develop my character?" Focus on virtues like wisdom, making good decisions based on understanding, justice, treating others fairly and contributing to the common good, courage, facing difficulties with bravery and integrity, and temperance, practicing moderation and self-control. When you make character development your primary goal, external circumstances become opportunities for growth rather than sources of suffering. The practice of sympathia. This Stoic concept refers to the interconnectedness of all things. Practice seeing yourself as part of a larger whole: your family, your community, humanity, nature, the cosmos. When someone treats you badly, remember that they are struggling with the same fundamental challenges you face. When you face difficulties, remember that countless others have faced similar challenges and that your experience connects you with the broader human story. This practice develops compassion and reduces the isolation that often accompanies suffering. The practice of present moment awareness. While the Stoics weren't primarily focused on mindfulness in the modern sense, they understood the importance of living in the present, rather than being lost in regrets about the past or anxieties about the future. Practice bringing your attention to the current moment when you notice your mind wandering into unhelpful territory. What can you appreciate right now? What choices are available to you in this moment? How can you respond wisely to your current situation? The practice of philosophical friendship. Seek out others who are interested in these ideas and practice discussing them together. Philosophy was never meant to be a purely solitary pursuit. Having friends who can challenge your thinking, support your growth, and remind you of these principles when you forget them is invaluable. You might start a Stoic reading group, find online communities focused on practical philosophy, or simply begin incorporating these ideas into conversations with open-minded friends. Now, let me address some of the deeper challenges you might encounter as you begin to implement these practices more seriously. The challenge of perfectionism. You might find yourself judging your progress harshly or expecting to master these practices quickly. Remember that even the ancient Stoics saw themselves as students rather than masters. Marcus Aurelius's meditations are full of reminders to himself about principles he was still learning to apply consistently. Be patient with yourself and focus on progress rather than perfection. The challenge of social resistance. As you become less reactive and more centered, some people in your life might respond negatively. They might accuse you of being cold, uncaring, or aloof. They might try to provoke emotional reactions from you because your equanimity makes them uncomfortable with their own reactivity. Remember that this is about them, not about you. Continue to be loving and compassionate while maintaining your inner stability. The challenge of grief and trauma. While Stoic principles can be incredibly helpful for dealing with ordinary difficulties, they should not be used to suppress or deny legitimate grief, or to excuse yourself from seeking help for serious trauma. If you've experienced significant loss or trauma, it's important to allow yourself to feel and process those emotions, while also gradually applying these principles. Consider working with a therapist who understands both emotional healing and philosophical approaches to resilience. The challenge of action versus acceptance. You might struggle with when to take action to change a situation versus when to accept it. The key is to ask yourself honestly, is this something I can actually influence, and is taking action aligned with my values and likely to be beneficial? If yes, then act. If no, then practice acceptance. Sometimes the answer isn't clear, and that's when wisdom and experience become important. The challenge of meaning-making. As you become less attached to external outcomes, you might initially feel a sense of emptiness or lack of purpose. This is temporary. As you develop your character and focus on virtue, you'll discover a deeper sense of meaning that doesn't depend on external validation or achievement. Your purpose becomes to live wisely, love well, and contribute to the common good in whatever ways are available to you. Let me share some stories of modern people who have successfully applied these principles to transform their lives. I know a man who was diagnosed with ALS, a progressive neurodegenerative disease, in his early 50s. Initially, he was devastated and angry. He had been a marathon runner, a successful businessman, and someone who prided himself on his physical strength and independence. The diagnosis seemed to destroy everything he had built his identity around. But over time, he began to apply Stoic principles to his situation. He focused on what remained within his control: his attitude, his relationships, his legacy, how he spent his remaining time. He stopped fighting against the reality of his condition, and instead asked how he could live well within its constraints. He wrote a book about his experience that has helped thousands of others facing similar challenges. He deepened his relationships with family and friends in ways that wouldn't have happened if he had remained healthy. He became an advocate for ALS research and support. He learned to find joy in simple pleasures that he had previously taken for granted: conversations with loved ones, beautiful sunsets, good food, meaningful music. He told me that despite his physical decline, he felt more peaceful and purposeful than he had ever felt before. He had learned to distinguish between what was happening to his body and what was happening in his essential self. The disease was destroying his physical capabilities, but it couldn't touch his capacity for love, wisdom, courage, and contribution to others. I know a woman who went through a painful divorce after discovering her husband's affair. Initially, she was consumed with rage, hurt, and a desire for revenge. She felt that her life had been destroyed and that she would never be able to trust anyone again. But as she learned about Stoic principles, she began to shift her focus from what her ex-husband had done to how she could respond in a way that aligned with her values. She stopped trying to control his choices or make him pay for his betrayal. She focused instead on her own healing, growth, and future. She used the experience to develop better boundaries and communication skills. She became more selective about who she trusted and more attuned to red flags in relationships. She pursued interests she had abandoned during her marriage and developed a stronger sense of her own identity independent of any romantic relationship. Eventually, she was able to genuinely forgive her ex-husband, not because what he did was okay, but because carrying anger was hurting her more than it was hurting him. She found a new partner with whom she has a healthier relationship than she ever had before. She often says that while she wouldn't choose to go through that experience again, she's grateful for what it taught her about resilience, self-worth, and the nature of love. I know a young man who struggled with severe social anxiety that was limiting his career prospects and personal relationships. He was terrified of being judged, criticized, or rejected, so he avoided situations where these things might happen. This avoidance was keeping him from pursuing opportunities and connecting with others. As he learned to apply Stoic principles, he began to understand that other people's opinions of him were outside his control and therefore not worth organizing his life around. He practiced negative visualization about being criticized or rejected and realized that these experiences, while unpleasant, wouldn't actually destroy him. He started deliberately putting himself in situations where judgment was possible, giving presentations at work, joining social groups, asking people on dates. He learned to see each failure as information and practice rather than as evidence of his worthlessness. Over time, his confidence grew not because he was getting universal approval, he wasn't, but because he was proving to himself that he could handle disapproval without being devastated by it. He developed genuine friendships, got promoted at work, and found a romantic partner who appreciated his authenticity. His social anxiety didn't disappear completely, but it no longer controlled his life. These stories illustrate something important. Applying Stoic principles doesn't eliminate life's challenges, but it can fundamentally change how you experience and respond to them. Instead of being a victim of circumstances, you become an active participant in creating your experience of those circumstances. Let me also address some common misconceptions about Stoicism that might prevent you from fully embracing these practices. Misconception 1. Stoics don't feel emotions. This is false. Stoics feel emotions just like everyone else. The difference is that they don't let emotions control their decisions or define their identity. They experience emotions as information rather than as commands that must be obeyed. Misconception 2. Stoicism promotes passivity. This is also false. Stoics take action on things they can control, while accepting things they cannot control. This often makes them more effective, not less, because they're not wasting energy on futile efforts. Misconception 3. Stoicism is pessimistic. On the contrary, Stoicism is ultimately optimistic, because it teaches that peace and happiness are possible regardless of external circumstances. It's pessimistic about controlling externals, but optimistic about human potential for wisdom and virtue. Misconception 4. Stoicism is emotionally cold. While Stoics practice emotional regulation, this doesn't make them cold or uncaring. Many Stoics are deeply loving and compassionate people who are simply not overwhelmed by their emotions. Misconception 5. Stoicism is only for privileged people. While some famous Stoics were wealthy or powerful, the philosophy has been embraced by people from all walks of life, including slaves like Epictetus. The principles are universal and can be applied by anyone regardless of their circumstances. As we near the end of our exploration, I want to emphasize once more that this is not just philosophical theory, but practical wisdom that can transform your daily experience. The ancient trick to never getting hurt again is not a magic formula that will instantly solve all your problems. It's a set of practices that, when applied consistently over time, can gradually build your emotional resilience and inner peace. The journey of implementing these ideas is itself valuable. Each time you pause to examine your automatic reactions, each time you focus on what you can control rather than what you can't, each time you choose acceptance over resistance, you're strengthening your capacity for wisdom and peace. You might find that some days you apply these principles easily and other days you forget them completely. This is normal and expected. The goal is not perfect consistency, but gradual improvement. Even the ancient Stoics had days when they struggled to apply their own teachings. What matters is your commitment to the practice, your willingness to keep learning and growing, and your understanding that each challenge is an opportunity to develop greater wisdom and strength. I want to leave you with some final thoughts and practical guidance for your journey ahead. First, start small. Don't try to revolutionize your entire approach to life overnight. Pick 1 or 2 practices that resonate with you, and focus on those for a few weeks before adding others. You might start with the morning reflection and evening review, or with practicing the dichotomy of control in one area of your life. Second, be compassionate with yourself. You will sometimes forget these principles when you need them most. You will sometimes react emotionally before remembering to pause and think. This doesn't mean you're failing, it means you're human. Treat these lapses as learning opportunities rather than as evidence that the practices don't work. Third, find ways to remind yourself of these ideas throughout the day. You might set phone reminders to ask yourself, "What's up to me right now?" Or, "How can I respond wisely to this situation?" You might carry a small notebook with key quotes or principles. You might find a piece of jewelry or other object that reminds you of your commitment to these practices. Fourth, seek out sources of ongoing learning and inspiration. Read the ancient texts, but also explore modern applications of Stoic principles. There are many excellent books, podcasts, and online resources that can help you deepen your understanding and stay motivated. Fifth, practice with small challenges before testing these principles on major difficulties. If you can learn to apply Stoic principles to minor irritations like traffic jams or rude salespeople, you'll be better prepared to use them when facing more significant challenges. Sixth, remember that this is a lifelong practice. There is no graduation from the school of wisdom. Even after years of practice, you'll continue to discover new applications of these principles and new depths of understanding. This is part of what makes the journey so rewarding. Finally, remember that the ultimate goal is not just your own peace of mind, but your ability to contribute positively to the world. When you're not constantly struggling with your own emotional reactions, you have more energy and clarity to help others, to work for justice, to create beauty, to solve problems, and to love well. The ancient Stoics believed that we are all part of a larger whole, and that our individual development serves the common good. As you become more wise, more peaceful, and more resilient, you become better able to serve others and to make a positive difference in the world. This is perhaps the most beautiful aspect of this ancient wisdom. It makes you both more independent and more connected, more self-reliant and more loving, more accepting, and more engaged with life. The path is not always easy, but it is always available. The choice is always yours. You can continue to let external events determine your emotional state, or you can begin the journey toward inner freedom and peace. The ancient trick to never getting hurt again is really a collection of mental tools and perspectives that, when practiced consistently, can transform your relationship with life's inevitable challenges. It's not about avoiding pain, but about not adding unnecessary suffering to that pain. It's not about becoming invulnerable, but about becoming resilient. It's not about not caring, but about caring wisely. Every moment offers you the opportunity to practice wisdom. Every challenge gives you a chance to apply these principles. Every interaction with others allows you to embody the virtues you're developing. The Stoics believed that wisdom is the only true good because it's the only thing that can never be taken away from you. External circumstances can change, but your character, your understanding, your capacity for virtue, these remain yours regardless of what happens around you. This is the security and freedom that the ancient philosophers discovered, and it's available to you as well. Not because life will stop presenting challenges, but because you will develop the wisdom and strength to meet those challenges with grace, understanding, and inner peace. The journey begins with a single step, the decision to take responsibility for your own inner state, rather than hoping that external circumstances will provide your peace and happiness. Everything else follows from this fundamental choice. Thank you for taking this journey with me today. I hope these ideas serve you well as you navigate the inevitable challenges and opportunities that life will present. Remember, every moment is a chance to practice wisdom. Every difficulty is an opportunity to grow stronger, and every day is a gift to be received with gratitude rather than taken for granted. The ancient wisdom is waiting for you. The practices are available. The choice is yours. Stay strong, stay wise, and remember that your peace of mind is ultimately in your own hands. That's not a burden. It's the greatest gift you could ever receive, because it means that no matter what happens to you, you always have the power to choose how you respond. And in that choice lies your freedom. The ancient trick to never getting hurt again is not really a trick at all. It's wisdom. It's the accumulated insight of some of the greatest minds in human history about how to live well regardless of circumstances. It's a way of thinking and being that has been tested by thousands of years of human experience and found to be both practical and profound. But before we conclude, I want to take you on a deeper journey. We've covered the foundational principles, but there's so much more to explore. Let's dive into how Stoicism compares to other philosophical and psychological approaches, examine the fascinating neuroscience behind emotional resilience, explore how different cultures have applied these principles, and discover the advanced techniques that can take your practice to the next level. Part 2. Stoicism versus other philosophical approaches. One of the most frequently asked questions I receive is, how does Stoicism compare to Buddhism, existentialism, or modern psychology? This is a crucial question because understanding these differences can help you integrate the best insights from multiple traditions while avoiding potential contradictions or confusion. Let's start with Buddhism, which shares some remarkable similarities with Stoicism but also has some important differences. Both traditions recognize that suffering comes primarily from our attachments and mental reactions rather than from external circumstances themselves. Both emphasize the impermanence of all things and the importance of accepting reality as it is, rather than as we wish it were. The Buddhist concept of the Four Noble Truths closely parallels Stoic insights. The first noble truth states that life contains suffering. This aligns with the Stoic recognition that pain is inevitable. The second noble truth identifies attachment and craving as the root of suffering. This mirrors the Stoic understanding that our desires and expectations create emotional disturbance. The third noble truth promises that suffering can end. This corresponds to the Stoic promise of achieving inner peace through wisdom. The fourth noble truth outlines the path to end suffering. This parallels the Stoic emphasis on practical exercises and daily practices. However, there are some significant differences. Buddhism generally takes a more pessimistic view of desire itself, often seeking to eliminate desire altogether. The Buddhist ideal is often presented as achieving a state of desirelessness or non-attachment that can seem almost otherworldly. Stoicism, on the other hand, doesn't ask you to eliminate desire, but to hold your desires lightly and to desire what actually happens rather than fighting against reality. Buddhism also tends to focus more on the illusory nature of the self, while Stoicism maintains a stronger sense of individual agency and responsibility. The Buddhist concept of no self, or anatta, suggests that the individual ego is ultimately an illusion to be transcended. Stoicism, while recognizing our interconnectedness with others and with nature, maintains that we are responsible agents who can and should exercise rational choice. Let me illustrate this difference with a practical example. Imagine you're facing a job loss. A Buddhist approach might emphasize accepting this change as part of the natural flow of existence, recognizing that your attachment to your job title or income was creating suffering, and perhaps seeing this as an opportunity to reduce material desires and focus on spiritual development. A Stoic approach would also emphasize acceptance, but it would focus more on what you can control in response to this situation, updating your resume, networking, developing new skills, managing your finances wisely, maintaining your character and integrity throughout the process. The Stoic would see this as an opportunity to practice virtue and develop resilience while taking practical action. Both approaches can be valuable, and many people find ways to integrate insights from both traditions. The key is understanding when each perspective might be most helpful. Now, let's compare Stoicism to existentialism, the philosophical movement that emerged in the 19th and 20th centuries through thinkers like Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Sartre, and Camus. At first glance, existentialism and Stoicism might seem completely opposed to each other. Existentialists emphasize the absurdity of existence, the burden of absolute freedom, and the necessity of creating your own meaning in a meaningless universe. Stoics, on the other hand, believe in a rational cosmic order and see virtue as objectively valuable. However, there are some interesting parallels. Both traditions emphasize individual responsibility and the power of choice. Sartre's famous declaration that we are condemned to be free echoes the Stoic emphasis on our ultimate responsibility for our own responses to life. Both traditions reject the idea that we are victims of circumstances and insist that we have the power to choose our attitude and actions regardless of external conditions. The existentialist concept of authentic existence, living according to your own values, rather than conforming to external expectations, has much in common with the Stoic emphasis on living according to virtue rather than seeking approval or external validation. Both traditions value courage, honesty, and taking responsibility for your choices. The main difference lies in their view of meaning and purpose. Existentialists generally argue that life has no inherent meaning and that we must create our own purpose through our choices and commitments. Stoics believe that living virtuously is objectively meaningful and that we can align ourselves with the rational order of the universe. Let's consider how these different approaches might handle a crisis of meaning, perhaps someone feeling that their life lacks purpose after retiring from a long career. An existentialist approach might encourage this person to embrace the anxiety and uncertainty that comes with freedom, to take full responsibility for creating new meaning through their choices, and to commit to projects or relationships that they find personally significant, even knowing that this meaning is self-created rather than given. A Stoic approach would encourage this person to focus on developing and practicing virtue, wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance, and to find meaning through contributing to the common good and living according to reason. The Stoic would see this transition as an opportunity to clarify what really matters and to align their life more closely with virtue. Again, both approaches offer valuable insights. Many people find that combining existentialist emphasis on authenticity and self-creation with Stoic emphasis on virtue and rational acceptance creates a robust approach to life's challenges. Now let's examine how Stoicism relates to modern psychology and therapy. This comparison is particularly interesting because many contemporary therapeutic approaches have independently rediscovered insights that the Stoics articulated over 2,000 years ago. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is probably the modern therapeutic approach that most closely parallels Stoicism. CBT is based on the premise that our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are interconnected, and that by changing dysfunctional thought patterns, we can improve our emotional well-being and behavior. This is remarkably similar to the Stoic insight that our judgments about events, rather than the events themselves, determine our emotional responses. CBT techniques like cognitive restructuring, examining and challenging negative thought patterns, closely parallel Stoic practices of examining our judgments and assumptions. The CBT emphasis on identifying cognitive distortions like catastrophizing, all-or-nothing thinking, and personalizing events echoes Stoic warnings about the ways our minds can distort reality and create unnecessary suffering. However, there are some important differences. CBT is generally more focused on symptom reduction and practical problem solving, while Stoicism has broader goals of character development and living well. CBT tends to be more individualistic, while Stoicism emphasizes our interconnectedness and social responsibilities. CBT is usually a short-term intervention, while Stoicism is presented as a lifelong practice of philosophical development. Acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, is another modern approach that shares significant common ground with Stoicism. ACT emphasizes psychological flexibility, the ability to stay present with difficult thoughts and feelings while taking action guided by your values. This closely parallels the Stoic emphasis on accepting what you cannot control while taking action based on virtue and wisdom. ACT's concept of creative hopelessness, recognizing that attempts to control or eliminate difficult thoughts and feelings are often counterproductive, echoes the Stoic understanding that fighting against reality creates more suffering than accepting it. ACT's emphasis on values-based action mirrors the Stoic focus on virtue as the guide for behavior. Mindfulness-based stress reduction and other mindfulness approaches also share common ground with Stoicism, particularly in their emphasis on present moment awareness and acceptance of what is. However, mindfulness practices are generally more focused on awareness itself, while Stoicism combines awareness with rational analysis and value-based action. Positive psychology, developed by researchers like Martin Seligman, has rediscovered many insights that were central to Stoic philosophy. The positive psychology emphasis on character strengths, resilience, and eudaimonic well-being, happiness that comes from living according to virtue rather than from pleasure or positive emotions, closely parallels Stoic teachings. Research on post-traumatic growth, the phenomenon where people sometimes experience positive psychological changes following traumatic experiences, validates the Stoic insight that difficulties can serve our development and that we can find benefit even in painful experiences. However, positive psychology, like other modern approaches, tends to be more empirically focused and less concerned with broader philosophical questions about how to live well. Stoicism offers a more comprehensive worldview that addresses not just psychological well-being but also ethics, meaning, and our place in the cosmos. Let me share a practical example of how these different approaches might be integrated. Imagine someone dealing with chronic anxiety about their career prospects. A pure CBT approach might focus on identifying and challenging catastrophic thoughts about the future, developing coping strategies for managing anxiety symptoms, and creating action plans for career development. A mindfulness approach might emphasize accepting anxious thoughts and feelings without judgment, staying present rather than getting lost in future-focused worry, and developing a different relationship with anxiety where it's seen as just another mental event rather than as something that needs to be eliminated. An ACT approach might help this person clarify their career values, accept that anxiety might be present as they pursue meaningful work, and commit to taking action aligned with their values, even while experiencing uncomfortable emotions. A Stoic approach would incorporate elements of all these approaches, while adding a focus on character development and wisdom. The Stoic would examine the assumptions underlying the anxiety, perhaps unrealistic expectations about having complete control over career outcomes, or attachment to external markers of success, rather than to doing excellent work for its own sake. They would focus on what aspects of their career development they can actually control, while accepting the uncertainty that's inherent in any career path. They would see this challenge as an opportunity to develop virtues like courage, wisdom, and resilience. The beauty of understanding these different approaches is that you can draw insights from multiple traditions while maintaining a coherent overall framework. Many people find that Stoicism provides an excellent foundational philosophy that can be enhanced by specific techniques from other approaches. Part 3. The Neuroscience of Emotional Resilience. Now let's explore one of the most fascinating developments in recent decades, the scientific validation of many Stoic insights through neuroscience and psychology research. When the ancient Stoics talked about training the mind to achieve emotional equilibrium, they were describing processes that we now understand at the level of brain structure and function. The human brain has evolved over millions of years, and different parts of our brain serve different functions that were adaptive in our ancestral environment, but can sometimes work against us in modern life. Understanding how your brain works can help you appreciate why Stoic practices are so effective and can motivate you to continue practicing them even when they feel difficult. Let's start with the amygdala, often called the brain's alarm system. The amygdala is a small, almond-shaped structure in the limbic system that's responsible for detecting threats and triggering the fight-or-flight response. When the amygdala perceives danger, it floods your system with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, preparing your body to either fight the threat or run away from it. This system worked well when our ancestors faced physical threats like predators or natural disasters. If a lion was charging at you, you needed to react instantly without stopping to think. The amygdala's rapid response could save your life. However, in modern life, most of our threats are psychological rather than physical. Criticism from a boss, rejection from a romantic interest, financial stress, social embarrassment. The amygdala can't distinguish between a charging lion and a critical email from your supervisor. It responds to both with the same flood of stress hormones and the same preparation for physical action. This is why you might find your heart racing, your muscles tensing, and your breathing becoming shallow when you're facing psychological stress. Your body is preparing for physical action that isn't actually needed or helpful in the situation. The prefrontal cortex, located behind your forehead, is the part of your brain responsible for rational thinking, planning, and emotional regulation. This is the newest part of the human brain in evolutionary terms, and it's what allows us to override automatic emotional reactions and choose more thoughtful responses. However, there's a crucial relationship between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. When the amygdala is highly activated, it can essentially hijack your brain, making it difficult for the prefrontal cortex to function effectively. This is why you might find it hard to think clearly when you're very angry, anxious, or upset. Your emotional brain has temporarily overwhelmed your rational brain. This is exactly what the Stoics observed experientially over 2,000 years ago. They noticed that strong emotions can interfere with rational thinking and wise decision-making. What they called passions, overwhelming emotions that take control of our behavior, correspond closely to what neuroscientists now understand as amygdala hijacking. The good news is that the brain is remarkably plastic. It can change and adapt throughout your lifetime based on your experiences and practices. When you practice Stoic exercises like examining your judgments, focusing on what you can control, and accepting what you cannot control, you're literally rewiring your brain to be more resilient and less reactive. Meditation research has shown that regular practice can actually change brain structure. People who meditate regularly show increased gray matter in areas associated with learning, memory, and emotional regulation, and decreased gray matter in the amygdala. They also show stronger connections between the prefrontal cortex and other brain regions, suggesting better emotional regulation. The Stoic practice of negative visualization appears to work by a process that psychologists call hedonic adaptation. This is your brain's tendency to return to a baseline level of happiness, despite positive or negative events. However, you can harness this process intentionally by regularly imagining loss, which can increase your appreciation for what you currently have and reduce your anxiety about potential future losses. Neuroscientist Rick Hansen has described how the brain has a negativity bias. It's wired to pay more attention to potential threats than to positive experiences. This made sense in an environment where missing a threat could be fatal, but it can lead to chronic stress and anxiety in modern life. The Stoic practice of gratitude and focusing on what you can control helps counteract this natural negativity bias. Research on cognitive reappraisal, changing how you think about a situation to change how you feel about it, has shown that this process activates the prefrontal cortex and reduces activity in the amygdala. This is exactly what happens when you practice the Stoic technique of examining your judgments about events and choosing more rational interpretations. Studies on expressive writing about traumatic or stressful experiences, have shown significant physical and psychological benefits. People who write about difficult experiences show improved immune function, reduced stress hormones, and better emotional well-being. This research validates the Stoic practice of philosophical journaling and self-examination. Research on post-traumatic growth has found that many people who experience severe trauma eventually develop greater resilience, deeper relationships, increased appreciation for life, enhanced spiritual development, and a stronger sense of personal strength. This scientific finding supports the Stoic insight that difficulties can serve our growth and development. The concept of stress inoculation from psychology research parallels the Stoic practice of voluntary discomfort. Just as exposing yourself to small amounts of physical stress can make you more resilient to larger stresses, exposing yourself to minor psychological discomforts can build your capacity to handle major challenges. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio's research on emotion and decision-making has shown that purely rational decision-making is actually impossible. We need emotional input to make good choices. However, the key is having emotions inform our decisions rather than control them. This aligns perfectly with the Stoic goal of experiencing emotions without being overwhelmed by them. Research on the default mode network, the brain regions that are active when you're not focused on any particular task, has shown that excessive activity in this network is associated with rumination, anxiety, and depression. Practices that quiet the default mode network, including mindfulness and focused attention exercises, can improve psychological well-being. Many Stoic practices, particularly present moment awareness and rational analysis, appear to have similar effects. The neuroscience of empathy and compassion research has shown that these capacities can be developed through practice. People who engage in compassion training show increased activity in brain regions associated with empathy and emotional regulation. This supports the Stoic emphasis on developing virtue and caring for the common good. Studies on meaning and purpose have found that people who have a strong sense of purpose show better physical health, greater longevity, and increased resilience to stress. They also show different patterns of brain activity and gene expression. This research validates the Stoic emphasis on virtue and contributing to the common good as sources of meaning and well-being. The emerging field of psychoneuroimmunology studies how psychological states affect immune function. Research has shown that chronic stress suppresses immune function, while practices that promote emotional well-being can enhance it. People who practice meditation, gratitude, and other techniques for emotional regulation show better immune function and faster healing from illness and injury. Recent research on neuroplasticity has shown that the brain remains changeable throughout life. Even in older adults, new neural connections can form and existing connections can be strengthened through practice and learning. This means that it's never too late to develop greater emotional resilience and wisdom through Stoic practices. The science of habit formation has revealed how practices become automatic over time. When you repeatedly engage in the same mental processes, like examining your judgments or focusing on what you can control, these patterns become encoded in your brain as habits. Eventually, responding wisely to challenges becomes as automatic as your old patterns of reactivity once were. Understanding this neuroscience can be incredibly motivating because it shows that Stoic practices are not just philosophical ideals, but practical methods for changing your brain in ways that increase your well-being and resilience. Every time you pause to examine your automatic thoughts, every time you choose acceptance over resistance, every time you focus on what you can control rather than what you can't, you're literally rewiring your brain for greater peace and wisdom. Part 4. Cultural Applications and Global Perspectives. One of the most fascinating aspects of studying Stoicism is discovering how similar insights have emerged independently in cultures around the world. While Stoicism as a formal philosophical school originated in ancient Greece and Rome, the core insights about emotional resilience, acceptance, and virtue appear across many different cultural traditions. Let's explore how different cultures have approached these universal human challenges and what we can learn from their diverse perspectives. In ancient China, Taoism developed insights that closely parallel many Stoic teachings. The Taoist concept of Wu Wei, often translated as non-action or effortless action, involves working with natural forces rather than against them. This mirrors the Stoic emphasis on accepting what cannot be changed while taking appropriate action on what can be influenced. The Tao Te Ching, attributed to Lao Tzu, contains passages that could have been written by a Stoic philosopher. The sage does not attempt anything very big, and thus achieves greatness. This echoes the Stoic understanding that trying to control what's beyond our power leads to frustration, while focusing on what we can actually influence often leads to greater effectiveness. Taoism also emphasizes the complementary nature of opposites, yin and yang, strength and flexibility, action and rest. This parallels the Stoic understanding that difficulties and ease, loss and gain are both necessary aspects of a complete life. The Taoist sage learns to flow with changing circumstances rather than rigidly resisting them. However, Taoism tends to be more mystical and less rational than Stoicism. Where Stoics emphasize the use of reason to understand and accept cosmic order, Taoists often emphasize intuitive understanding and harmony with the natural flow of existence. In Japan, the samurai code of Bushido developed philosophical principles that share much with Stoicism. The samurai emphasis on accepting death, maintaining honor regardless of external circumstances, and focusing on duty rather than personal desires closely parallels Stoic virtues. The Japanese concept of mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of the impermanence of all things, reflects the same insight that Stoics expressed through practices like memento mori and negative visualization. Both traditions recognize that accepting impermanence can increase appreciation for present experiences while reducing attachment to what cannot be permanent. Japanese Zen Buddhism, influenced by both Chinese Taoism and Indian Buddhism, developed practices that emphasize present moment awareness, acceptance of what is, and the cultivation of equanimity in the face of difficulty. The Zen approach to meditation and mindfulness shares much with Stoic practices of self-examination and rational acceptance. The Japanese cultural value of gaman, enduring the seemingly unbearable with patience and dignity, reflects a Stoic-like approach to adversity. However, This concept has sometimes been criticized for promoting passive acceptance of unjust situations, rather than encouraging appropriate action for change. In India, various schools of Hindu philosophy developed insights that parallel Stoicism. The Bhagavad Gita, one of Hinduism's most important texts, teaches the principle of karma yoga, performing your duty without attachment to the results. This closely mirrors the Stoic emphasis on focusing on your actions and intentions while accepting that outcomes are not entirely under your control. The concept of dharma in Hindu philosophy, living according to your proper role and duty, parallels the Stoic emphasis on virtue and contributing to the common good. Both traditions see individual fulfillment as coming through alignment with larger principles rather than through pursuit of personal pleasure or advantage. The Hindu practice of tapas, voluntary austerity or discipline, shares much with the Stoic practice of voluntary discomfort. Both traditions recognize that deliberately accepting small difficulties can build resilience for handling larger challenges. However, Hindu philosophy generally includes concepts like reincarnation and karma that are not part of Stoic thought, and it often emphasizes transcending the material world in ways that Stoics, who were more engaged with practical life, might not endorse. In the Islamic tradition, the concept of sabr, patience, perseverance, and spiritual endurance reflects insights similar to Stoicism. Islamic teachings emphasize accepting Allah's will while taking appropriate action within the sphere of human responsibility. The Quranic principle, "and Allah does not burden a soul beyond that it can bear," parallels the Stoic confidence that we have the capacity to handle whatever challenges we face. The Islamic emphasis on tawakkul, trust in God combined with taking practical action, closely mirrors the Stoic balance between acceptance and effort. Both traditions reject fatalistic passivity while also rejecting the illusion that humans can control all outcomes. Islamic philosophy, particularly as developed by thinkers like Al-Ghazali and Ibn Rushd, Averroes, engaged deeply with Greek philosophy, including Stoicism, and many Islamic scholars found ways to integrate Stoic insights with Islamic theology. In indigenous cultures around the world, we find similar insights expressed through different frameworks. Many Native American traditions emphasize accepting one's place in the natural order while taking responsibility for one's actions and their effects on the community and future generations. The concept of thinking about the impact of decisions on 7 generations in the future reflects a long-term perspective similar to Stoic emphasis on virtue and legacy. African Ubuntu philosophy, "I am because we are," emphasizes the interconnectedness of all people and the importance of contributing to community well-being. This parallels the Stoic emphasis on cosmopolitanism and working for the common good. Many indigenous wisdom traditions include practices similar to negative visualization, regularly contemplating death, loss, and change as ways of increasing appreciation for life and building psychological resilience. In modern times, we can see Stoic-like insights being applied in various cultural contexts. In Scandinavia, the concept of lagom, having just the right amount, neither too little nor too much, reflects a Stoic-like emphasis on moderation and contentment with what you have rather than constantly seeking more. The Danish concept of hygge and the similar Swedish concept of lagom both emphasize finding contentment in simple pleasures and present moment experiences rather than constantly striving for future goals or external validation. In Japan, the modern concept of ikigai, one's reason for being or purpose in life, combines elements that Stoics would recognize: doing what you're good at, doing what the world needs, doing what you love, and doing what you can be paid for. This framework helps people find meaning through contribution and virtue, rather than through external achievement alone. The global mindfulness movement, which draws from Buddhist meditation practices but has been adapted for secular contexts, shares much with Stoic practices of present moment awareness and acceptance of what is. Modern positive psychology, developed primarily in Western academic contexts, has rediscovered many insights that appear across multiple wisdom traditions, including Stoicism. The focus on character strengths, resilience, and eudaimonic well-being reflects universal human insights about what leads to flourishing. What's particularly interesting is how these insights appear to be rediscovered by each generation and each culture, suggesting that they reflect fundamental truths about human nature and well-being rather than culturally specific beliefs. However, it's also important to recognize the differences between these traditions and not assume that they're all saying exactly the same thing. Each cultural context brings different emphases, practices, and understandings that can enrich our appreciation of these universal insights. For example, Eastern traditions often emphasize meditation and contemplative practices more than Western Stoicism did. Indigenous traditions often emphasize community and environmental connections more explicitly than classical Stoicism. Religious traditions offer frameworks for understanding suffering and meaning that secular Stoicism doesn't provide. Understanding these cultural variations can help you adapt Stoic practices to your own cultural context and personal needs. You might find that combining Stoic rational analysis with Buddhist mindfulness meditation creates a more complete practice for you. You might discover that indigenous emphasis on community responsibility enhances your understanding of Stoic cosmopolitanism. You might find that religious frameworks provide a sense of meaning and purpose that purely philosophical Stoicism doesn't fully address. The key is to remain open to learning from multiple wisdom traditions, while maintaining discernment about what serves your growth and well-being. Different approaches may be more helpful at different times in your life or for different types of challenges. This global perspective also reminds us that developing emotional resilience and wisdom is not just an individual pursuit, but a human one. Across cultures and throughout history, people have struggled with the same fundamental challenges we face today, dealing with loss, finding meaning, managing difficult emotions, living well in an uncertain world. Knowing that people throughout history and around the world have found ways to live with wisdom and peace can be both humbling and inspiring. It reminds us that we're part of a larger human story, and that the insights we're exploring have been tested by countless people across different times, places, and circumstances. Part 5. Advanced Stoic Techniques and Modern Applications. Now, let's explore some advanced Stoic techniques that can deepen your practice and help you apply these principles to the specific challenges of modern life. These practices build on the foundational concepts we've discussed and offer more sophisticated approaches to developing wisdom and resilience. The first advanced technique is what I call philosophical forensics, the practice of deeply analyzing your emotional reactions to understand the hidden beliefs and assumptions that create suffering. When you experience a strong emotional response to something, instead of just noting it and moving on, you investigate it like a detective examining a crime scene. Here's how this works. Let's say you feel intense anxiety about an upcoming presentation at work. Instead of just observing that you're anxious and trying to calm yourself down, you would ask a series of probing questions. What exactly am I afraid will happen? What would it mean if that actually occurred? What assumptions am I making about the audience, about my performance, about the consequences of imperfection? What beliefs about myself, success, or approval are underlying this anxiety? As you dig deeper, you might discover beliefs like, if I make any mistakes, people will think I'm incompetent. Or, my worth as a person depends on performing perfectly. Or, if this presentation doesn't go well, my entire career will be ruined. Once you've identified these underlying beliefs, you can examine them rationally. Are these beliefs actually true? Are they helpful? What evidence supports or contradicts them? What would I tell a friend who held these beliefs? This practice helps you understand the deeper patterns of thinking that create emotional suffering, allowing you to address root causes rather than just managing symptoms. The second advanced technique is virtue mapping, explicitly connecting your daily actions and decisions to the 4 cardinal virtues of wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. Instead of just trying to be virtuous in a general sense, you develop specific practices for cultivating each virtue in different areas of your life. For wisdom, you might commit to reading philosophical texts, seeking feedback from mentors, practicing intellectual humility by acknowledging when you don't know something, and making decisions based on careful reflection rather than impulse. For justice, you might focus on treating all people with fairness and respect, contributing to causes that serve the common good, speaking truth even when it's uncomfortable, and considering the broader impact of your choices on others. For courage, you might practice facing your fears incrementally, standing up for your values even when it's difficult, having honest conversations that you've been avoiding, and taking calculated risks in service of your goals. For temperance, you might work on moderating your consumption of food, entertainment, or material goods, managing your emotional reactions more skillfully, and finding the balance between effort and ease in your pursuits. By explicitly connecting your daily life to these virtue categories, you transform ordinary activities into opportunities for character development. The third advanced technique is temporal perspective shifting. Deliberately viewing your current situation from different time horizons to gain perspective and reduce emotional reactivity. When you're upset about something, you practice asking, "How will I view this situation in 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, 10 years, from my deathbed?" This technique helps you distinguish between genuinely important concerns and temporary upsets that will lose their significance over time. It also helps you maintain perspective during both difficult periods and times of great success, reminding you that this too shall pass. You can also practice reverse temporal perspective shifting, imagining how people in the past or future might view your current concerns. How would someone living through the Great Depression view your financial worries? How would someone from the Middle Ages view your health concerns? How might someone living 100 years from now view the problems that seem so urgent today? The fourth advanced technique is systematic gratitude archaeology, going beyond simple gratitude practices to deeply examine how even difficult experiences have contributed to your growth and well-being. This involves looking at past challenges and systematically identifying all the ways they served your development. For example, if you went through a difficult breakup, you might examine how it taught you about resilience, helped you clarify what you value in relationships, led you to develop independence and self-reliance, connected you with supportive friends, motivated you to pursue interests you had neglected, or prepared you for a healthier relationship later. This isn't about convincing yourself that everything happens for the best, but about training yourself to see the complex ways that difficulties often contribute to growth and wisdom. This practice helps you develop genuine appreciation for your entire life experience, including the parts that were painful. The fifth advanced technique is philosophical role-playing, deliberately adopting the perspective of a wise person when facing challenges. When you're dealing with a difficult situation, you ask yourself, how would Marcus Aurelius handle this? What would Seneca say? How would Epictetus respond? But you can expand this beyond just Stoic philosophers. You might ask, how would the wisest person I know personally handle this situation? How would I advise my best friend if they were facing this challenge? How would I want to be remembered for handling this situation? This technique helps you access wisdom that you already possess, but might not be applying to your own situation. It's often easier to think clearly about other people's problems than about your own, so adopting an outside perspective can help you respond more wisely. The sixth advanced technique is cosmic humility practice, regularly contemplating your place in the vastness of space and time to maintain perspective on your daily concerns. This involves studying astronomy, cosmology, and deep history to develop a visceral understanding of how small and brief your individual existence is in the context of the universe. You might spend time looking at images from the Hubble telescope, reading about the age of the universe, contemplating the number of galaxies and stars, or thinking about the billions of people who have lived before you and the billions who will live after you. This practice isn't meant to make you feel insignificant, but to help you maintain perspective on what truly matters. When you're upset about a social media comment or a workplace slight, remembering that you're a temporary arrangement of atoms on a small planet, orbiting an ordinary star in one galaxy among billions, can help you see these concerns in proper proportion. The seventh advanced technique is pre-grief practice, deliberately mourning future losses while you still have what you value. This goes beyond negative visualization to include actually feeling and processing the emotions associated with anticipated losses. You might spend time genuinely grieving the inevitable death of your parents while they're still alive, allowing yourself to feel the sadness of this future reality. This isn't morbid dwelling, but practical preparation that can help you appreciate your time with them more deeply and be better prepared emotionally when the loss actually occurs. This practice recognizes that grief is a natural and healthy response to loss, but that much of our suffering comes from resisting or being unprepared for the reality of loss. By doing some of the emotional work in advance, you can reduce the shock and denial that often accompany unexpected losses. The eighth advanced technique is virtue under pressure testing, deliberately placing yourself in challenging situations to practice applying Stoic principles when it's difficult. This might involve having difficult conversations you've been avoiding, taking on challenges that push your comfort zone, or practicing patience and kindness when you're stressed or tired. The idea is that virtue is like a muscle that needs to be exercised under load to grow stronger. It's easy to be patient when everything is going well, but real growth comes from practicing patience when you're frustrated. It's easy to be courageous when there's no risk, but courage develops through facing actual fears. You might deliberately put yourself in situations where your values will be tested, perhaps speaking up about something important at work even though it might be unpopular, or maintaining your integrity in a situation where cutting corners would be easier. The ninth advanced technique is philosophical mentorship cultivation, actively seeking guidance from both living and historical figures who embody the wisdom you want to develop. This involves studying the lives and writings of people you admire, but also actively seeking mentorship from wise people in your current life. You might identify someone you respect and ask if you can meet with them regularly to discuss life challenges and philosophical questions. You might join or create a philosophical discussion group where people support each other in applying wisdom to daily life. You might find ways to serve as a mentor to others, which often deepens your own understanding. The goal is to create a community of practice around wisdom and virtue, recognizing that philosophical development is enhanced by relationship and dialogue with others who share similar commitments. The 10th advanced technique is systems thinking application, using Stoic principles to address complex, long-term challenges rather than just individual moments of difficulty. This involves applying concepts like the dichotomy of control and obstacle as opportunity thinking to large-scale problems like career development, relationship patterns, health challenges, or social issues. For example, if you're dealing with a chronic health condition, systems thinking would involve identifying all the aspects of your health that you can influence: diet, exercise, stress management, medical compliance, sleep habits, while accepting the aspects you cannot control: genetic predisposition, past damage, unpredictable flares. You would develop long-term strategies for managing your condition while maintaining the flexibility to adapt as circumstances change. This approach recognizes that many of life's most important challenges require sustained effort over years or decades, and that Stoic principles can guide not just moment-to-moment responses, but also long-term planning and strategy. Now let's explore how these advanced techniques apply to specific modern challenges that the ancient Stoics never had to consider. Social media and digital technology present unique challenges for emotional resilience. The constant comparison with others' curated online personas can trigger envy, inadequacy, and FOMO, fear of missing out. The addictive design of many digital platforms can undermine our ability to focus and be present. The rapid pace of information and constant connectivity can create chronic stress and anxiety. Stoic principles offer powerful antidotes to these modern challenges. The practice of focusing on what you can control becomes crucial when dealing with social media. You can control what you post, how much time you spend online, and how you interpret others' posts, but you cannot control how others respond to your content or what they choose to share about their lives. The understanding that other people's opinions are outside your control becomes especially important in dealing with online criticism or lack of engagement with your posts. The practice of negative visualization can help you maintain perspective about digital possessions, your follower count, your online reputation, your digital devices, by regularly remembering that these things are temporary and not essential to your well-being. Climate change and environmental degradation present another set of challenges that require sophisticated application of Stoic principles. These issues can trigger feelings of despair, helplessness, and anxiety about the future that can be overwhelming if not handled skillfully. The dichotomy of control becomes crucial here. You cannot control global climate systems, international politics, or other people's environmental choices, but you can control your own consumption, your political engagement, your career choices, and your daily habits. Focusing on what you can actually influence while accepting the limitations of individual action can help you maintain both hope and effectiveness. The Stoic emphasis on contributing to the common good provides motivation for environmental action, while the acceptance of outcomes beyond your control prevents despair when progress seems slow or insufficient. Economic uncertainty and job market changes present challenges that require long-term strategic thinking combined with emotional resilience. The gig economy, automation, and rapid technological change mean that traditional career paths are less predictable than they once were. Stoic principles suggest focusing on developing skills and character qualities that are valuable regardless of specific economic conditions. Things like integrity, adaptability, strong communication skills, continuous learning, and emotional resilience. The practice of preferred indifference becomes important here. You can prefer financial security while not making your happiness dependent on achieving it. The understanding that external circumstances don't determine your worth or your capacity for flourishing becomes crucial when dealing with job loss, economic downturns, or career setbacks. Relationship challenges in the modern world often involve complexities that ancient Stoics didn't face. Online dating, long-distance relationships maintained through technology, divorce and blended families, changing gender roles and relationship expectations. Stoic principles of loving without attachment, focusing on what you can control in relationships, your own behavior, communication, and character, and accepting that other people's choices are ultimately outside your control, remain relevant, but require thoughtful application to modern contexts. The practice of philosophical forensics becomes especially valuable in examining the beliefs and expectations about relationships that create suffering, ideas about soulmates, perfect matches, or relationships that should always be easy and conflict-free. Health and aging in the modern world involve both opportunities and challenges that require Stoic wisdom. Medical advances mean that we have more control over certain aspects of our health than previous generations, but they also create new anxieties about optimization, longevity, and medical decision-making. The Stoic approach to health involves taking reasonable care of your body while accepting that illness, aging, and death remain inevitable. This means neither ignoring health nor becoming obsessed with controlling every aspect of your physical condition. Modern challenges like information overload, decision fatigue, and the paradox of choice, having so many options that decision-making becomes overwhelming, can be addressed through Stoic principles of focusing on what truly matters, accepting that you cannot research every possible option exhaustively, and recognizing that most decisions are less consequential than they seem. The practice of temporal perspective shifting becomes especially valuable here. Asking yourself whether a particular choice will matter in 5 years can help you avoid spending excessive time and energy on relatively minor decisions. Parenting in the modern world presents unique challenges around technology use, academic pressure, safety concerns, and preparing children for an uncertain future. Stoic principles suggest focusing on developing your children's character and resilience rather than trying to control all their experiences or outcomes. This means teaching children to distinguish between what they can and cannot control, helping them develop emotional regulation skills, modeling virtuous behavior, and accepting that your children will ultimately make their own choices and face their own challenges. Political engagement and social justice work require balancing the Stoic emphasis on acceptance with the imperative to work for positive change. This involves focusing on the aspects of social problems that you can actually influence while accepting that large-scale change often happens slowly and that you cannot control other people's political choices. The Stoic virtue of justice provides motivation for social engagement. while the practices of emotional regulation help you maintain effectiveness, even when dealing with frustrating or heartbreaking social issues. As we conclude this exploration of advanced techniques in modern applications, remember that the goal is not to become a perfect Stoic sage overnight, but to gradually develop greater wisdom and resilience through consistent practice. These advanced techniques are tools to be experimented with and adapted to your own life circumstances and challenges. The beauty of Stoicism is that it provides a robust framework that can be applied to virtually any challenge or circumstance. As the world continues to change and present new difficulties, the fundamental insights about emotional resilience, virtue, and wisdom remain relevant and valuable. The ancient trick to never getting hurt again is not really a trick at all. It's wisdom. It's the accumulated insight of some of the greatest minds in human history about how to live well regardless of circumstances. It's a way of thinking and being that has been tested by thousands of years of human experience and found to be both practical and profound. And now, it's yours to explore, to practice, and to make your own. The only question is, what will you do with this gift?